Nina Park took a deep breath before the imposing glass facade of Cameron Corp's headquarters. It was her first major project as the lead designer, and all she wanted was to make a good impression. However, fate seemed to have other plans. In the last review, Nina had discovered a serious error that could compromise not only the project, but also her own professional credibility. There was no time to notify the team. She had to handle everything personally, even if it meant interrupting the meeting of senior executives. Convinced she was doing the right thing, Nina quickened her pace and entered the building with determination. The conference room doors slid open quietly, revealing an imposing atmosphere. The meeting was already in progress, and the air was tense. Among the company leaders, each more focused than the next, stood Alex Donovan, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that exuded power and perfection, commanding the room with a calm, calculated voice as he laid out a bold business strategy to the company's top executives and investors. Nina broke the silence of the room with her unexpected entrance, drawing suspicious and surprised glances. She swallowed, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on her, but maintained her poise. With quick steps, she approached the projector, already gesturing to display updates she had on her tablet. Her heart raced, but her expression remained determined. Ignoring the reproachful looks, she began speaking without ceremony. "Apologies for the interruption, but I need to address an urgent revision in the main project," she said, her voice a blend of confidence and urgency. "There's an error in the blueprint that must be corrected before any further action." The entire room buzzed with murmurs, and Alex fixed his gaze on her. With an impassive expression, he raised an eyebrow, watching her with a mix of incredulity and irritation. Nina noticed his look but continued with her presentation of the technical errors that had been made, unaware she was exposing flaws in the project he had previously approved. Alex waited for her to finish, and the silence that followed seemed to freeze the air. Crossing his arms, he spoke in a low, controlled voice with a trace of irritation. "Do you have any idea where you are? And more importantly, do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" His voice was cold, and his words sharp. Nina felt her face flush. She hadn't considered that this man could be Alex Donovan himself, the CEO rumored to be a legend in the industry. She knew of his reputation for being unyielding and a perfectionist, but she hadn't expected him to be so young, so intimidating. Taking a deep breath, she tried to keep her composure. "I know exactly where I am, and I know my role here is to ensure the integrity of the project. This error needs correction, or we risk compromising the entire execution," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Alex's gaze narrowed slightly. There was a calculated coldness there, a thorough assessment of her stance and the extent of her willingness to challenge him. He turned to the screen, analyzing the information Nina displayed. The other executives sat in absolute silence, watching the intense exchange between the two with looks of expectation and discomfort. Alex took a moment to study the slides she was presenting, and an almost imperceptible flash of surprise crossed his face before vanishing. He realized there was indeed a calculation error. Still, his pride and authority had been challenged before the team, and he wasn't about to let her off the hook easily. "You must be new here," he said, his tone a mix of irony and disdain. "Let me explain how things work at Cameron Corp. If there's a problem, you follow the proper channels before barging into a meeting with investors and disregarding your superior's authority. Understood?" Nina felt each of Alex's words as a direct reprimand and an affront to her professionalism. Anger rose in her, but she forced herself to remain composed, knowing a slip-up here could cost her job and credibility. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Donovan," she replied in a controlled tone laced with defiance. "And I also understand that the error was detected too late and that correcting it is a priority, regardless of protocol." Her response evoked a mix of admiration and shock among those present. No one ever dared to contradict Alex Donovan, especially in public. His eyes gleamed with newfound interest but also with a perceptible irritation. He stepped closer, breaking any formal distance between them, and in a low, cutting tone said, "You're brave, I'll admit that. But the next time you disregard the hierarchy, I'll make sure this is your last project at Cameron Corp. Is that clear?" Nina kept her gaze fixed on his, challenging him in silence. Every word of Alex's was a provocation, but she wasn't willing to back down. Even under the pressure of his stare, she refused to show submission. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and nodded in agreement. "Very clear, Mr. Donovan. I hope you also consider that my intent was not to disrespect anyone, only to ensure the project's efficiency." They remained silent for a moment, eyes locked, as if a silent battle was unfolding beneath the surface. Alex finally withdrew, turning his gaze back to the presentation. Nina felt her heart gradually slowing, but a wave of pride filled her. Even after the tension, she knew she had done the right thing. "We'll continue with the project analysis and correct what's necessary. And I hope, Miss Park, that you've learned a lesson about how to handle urgent matters," he declared, giving her one last look before resuming control of the meeting. Nina nodded, feeling the weight of Alex's words and the humiliation between the lines. After the meeting, as the room emptied, she gathered her documents and prepared to leave. But before she could, Alex approached her, his expression serious, but with an enigmatic glint in his eyes. "Miss Park, I want to see you in my office tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Don't be late," he said in a tone that brooked no questions. She nodded, but deep down, she wondered if the summons would be a reprimand or an opportunity to prove her worth. That night, Nina could barely sleep. Her first day at Cameron Corp had been an emotional roller coaster, and she couldn't shake the intense, challenging gaze of Alex Donovan from her mind. He was everything people said: cold, calculating, and absolutely unyielding. Yet for some reason, she felt that confrontation had sparked something in him, a flicker of curiosity he seemed unwilling to show openly. In the morning, Nina headed to his office with impeccable punctuality, each step reflecting her determination. When she entered, she found Alex seated behind a dark wooden desk, watching her with a look that mixed curiosity and coldness. He gestured for her to sit and began speaking without preamble. "Yesterday, you broke an important rule, but I admit you did it with courage and conviction. I see potential in you, and I want to understand this determination better. But I need you to know that here, everything follows a process, and I do not tolerate insubordination. This is a place for professionals who respect hierarchy and protocol. Do you understand?" Nina nodded, and he continued, as if testing her. "That said, I'm giving you a new responsibility. I need someone with your initiative to lead the next project, under my direct supervision. This means we'll work together, and you'll be under my constant evaluation." She almost smiled, surprised by the opportunity unfolding before her. Alex watched her closely, looking for signs of a reaction. But Nina remained professional, thanking him with a neutral tone, trying to conceal her excitement and the pressure she felt. When he finally dismissed her, the sense of victory was palpable, but she knew the new responsibility would bring more confrontations and tests. As she left his office, Nina felt a rush of adrenaline. She had just been given a chance, but this opportunity came laden with challenges and expectations. Working alongside Alex Donovan was a double-edged sword, and she knew each step would have to be calculated. Nina Park left his office with a mix of pride and adrenaline, aware that her first day hadn't gone as planned, but it had certainly made an impact. She walked down the hallway, feeling Alex's gaze on her back, that gaze that was both a challenge and an enigmatic curiosity. The clash between them still echoed in her mind, and she wondered what it would be like to work under his direct supervision on such an important project. It was the beginning of a journey she knew would be filled with highs and lows, with Alex Donovan both as adversary and mentor. Alex Donovan sat in his office after the meeting with Nina Park, still absorbing the intensity of their first confrontation. The young designer had left a strong impression, but for him, it meant more than just a show of courage. There was something about her direct and determined manner that reminded him of a past he preferred to forget. Nina wasn't just a new employee. She was a reminder of everything he had lost, of everything he had fought to rebuild. And he felt an insidious anger mixed with an unsettling feeling of reluctant admiration. The Donovan family, one of the most influential in construction and design on the East Coast, had been a consolidated empire for generations. However, that empire crumbled after a financial scandal that ruined the company and destroyed the Donovan name. Alex was still young at the time, but witnessed the pain his father endured as he lost everything he had fought for, the result of poorly managed investments and betrayals by partners he had trusted completely. His father couldn't bear the loss. His health deteriorated, and Alex was forced to watch the decline of his hero. He swore he would build something even bigger, but to do so, he had to adopt an unyielding, even insensitive, stance to shield himself from any threat that might appear. Nina, with her bold stance and determination in pointing out the project's flaws, stirred up memories of everything he tried to avoid. The risk of trusting, of getting involved with the people who worked for him. Upon discovering she was new to Cameron Corp, Alex saw her as the perfect opportunity to reinforce his authority and ensure no one else would dare to challenge him. He knew Nina was competent, and perhaps it was precisely that competence that bothered him. It was as if, unconsciously, he felt threatened by her, as though his pride was at stake. The next day, Alex decided Nina would lead a new expansion project, but with a condition. She would have to go through a series of stages he planned to make increasingly difficult. He intended to complicate every detail, constantly changing the project scope, adjusting deadlines, and demanding rigorous review of each decision she made. His intent was clear: test her resilience and ability to handle pressure. After all, if she failed, he would have the perfect justification to remove her from the position. If she succeeded, well, he would still be in control of the situation. Nina received the news enthusiastically. She knew it would be tough, but at the same time, she saw it as an opportunity for growth. However, after receiving the first details, she quickly realized that the situation was more complicated than she had imagined. Alex not only supervised each step of her work, but also made a point of holding long, detailed meetings to review each decision. He introduced unexpected adjustments, slashed the budget, and demanded new justifications for previously approved expenses. She began to realize this wasn't just rigorous oversight. He was testing her, maybe even challenging her, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. One morning, after an intense week of work, Alex called her to an unexpected meeting. Nina entered the conference room, feeling the heavy air as she saw Alex already positioned at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on a report she had carefully prepared the night before. "Miss Park," he began, without even looking at her, "I see here a list of additional costs that weren't approved. Can you explain why?" Nina took a deep breath, already anticipating the question. She had spent hours analyzing each point in that report, adjusting values, verifying data, and she knew everything aligned with the project's needs. These costs were justified in the initial budget. Mr. Donovan, I believe there was an adjustment in the last request, so I merely updated the values to reflect the requested material changes. It wouldn't be possible to maintain the required quality without these adjustments. Alex looked up, his eyes cold and calculating, evaluating every word she said. He knew she was right, but wouldn't let her leave the discussion without questioning every detail. Despite her well-founded arguments, he insisted on disagreeing, suggesting unworkable alternatives and challenging her to justify each alteration. During the exchange, Alex showed no openness to agree, forcing Nina to defend herself repeatedly until she realized he was deliberately trying to destabilize her. "If you had enough experience, perhaps you'd understand that efficient management means avoiding any additional costs," he said in a tone of disdain that made Nina clench her fists under the table, feeling her indignation grow. "After all, you're new here and may not yet have learned how things really work around here." The provocation was calculated. He wanted to see how far she would endure. Nina stared at him, keeping her composure, though her heart was racing and a strong urge to respond in kind simmered within her. "Thank you for the feedback, Mr. Donovan," she replied, with a voice firm yet controlled. "I will strive to meet the quality standards the company demands." Alex leaned back in his chair, a barely perceptible smile curving his lips. He was impressed with her response, though he wouldn't admit it. He had expected an impulsive reaction, an outburst, but she had remained calm and handled herself well. Nevertheless, he didn't intend to stop there. In the days that followed, he continued to impose demands bordering on the absurd, each increasingly complex and challenging. Nina spent sleepless nights reviewing documents, adjusting proposals, and finding creative solutions to Alex's ever-rigorous demands. There were moments when she wondered why he was acting this way, but at the same time, she felt more determined to prove herself capable. The desire to surpass him, to show he couldn't bring her down, grew with each obstacle. Meanwhile, Alex watched her every move with a growing, almost disturbing interest. Her determination was something he hadn't seen in a long time, and although he tried to convince himself that this was merely a professional test, the truth was that something about Nina intrigued him deeply. She wasn't like the other employees who would either cower or try to please him at all costs. Nina challenged his authority in a way that, as infuriating as it was, also made him question his own motivations. In the project's third week, Alex decided to up the difficulty level even further. Knowing that Nina was overwhelmed, he assigned her to lead a last-minute presentation for the board of investors, giving her only one day to prepare. She had to consolidate all the information, organize charts, review data, and rehearse the presentation in under 24 hours. For Alex, this was a trial by fire. He wanted to see how far she would go without breaking. Nina, though exhausted, accepted the challenge with a determined look. She spent the night at the office, gathering information and fine-tuning the presentation details. When she was finally ready, she realized she had less than an hour to rest. She closed her eyes for a few minutes and, upon getting up, knew that this would be one of the most important presentations of her life. Alex watched her from afar, impressed with her resilience. He expected her to break at any moment, to admit she was overwhelmed, but Nina seemed only more determined. Deep down, Alex knew that this determination was what both attracted and irritated him. She was a force of nature, a presence he couldn't ignore, and as much as he tried to convince himself otherwise, it was becoming clear that this clash of wills was becoming something personal. On the morning of the presentation, Nina entered the conference room with a confident air, even though she knew her energy was at its limit. Alex was seated among the investors, watching her closely. She began the presentation with a calm and objective introduction, surprising everyone with the precision and level of detail she had achieved in such a short time. As the presentation progressed, Alex felt a tinge of pride well up inside him. Nina was doing extraordinarily well, and for the first time, he found himself questioning his own intentions. He had planned to make her life difficult to prove a point, but instead, he was witnessing a professional who not only rose to the challenges, but exceeded his expectations at every turn. When she finished the presentation, the room was silent for a few seconds before the investors began to applaud. Nina felt a wave of relief, but also satisfaction upon seeing the approving look that Alex, albeit reluctantly, tried to hide. After the investor presentation, the atmosphere at Cameron Corp seemed to shift constantly. Nina's flawless performance earned her the silent admiration of several executives, and though Alex Donovan didn't offer direct praise, it was clear he was paying close attention to every detail of her work. That night, while reviewing reports, Alex felt a strange sensation, a mix of reluctant respect and growing discomfort. Nina had overcome every challenge he imposed, and to him, this was as much a threat as it was proof of her rare potential. The following day, Alex called Nina to a more informal meeting in one of the project rooms. He waited for her standing, his expression serious, studying the blueprints of a new venture he had envisioned months before Nina joined the company. It was a grand, complex project representing everything he aspired for Cameron Corp: innovation, greatness, and exclusivity. When Nina entered the room, the tension was palpable, yet she kept her expression confident. After all the challenges Alex had thrown her way, Nina felt that nothing could shake her determination. Alex began the meeting with a straightforward introduction, foregoing formalities and getting right to the point. "We need to discuss the next step in the project. It requires precision, vision, and above all, trust." He paused, watching her as if assessing her ability to handle what was coming. "This will be a definitive test, and I'll need you to make quick, assertive decisions, without hesitation." Nina nodded, feeling the weight of his expectations. Even though Alex was unyielding and demanding, she knew every step so far had prepared her for something greater. However, there was something unusual about this meeting, an intensity in Alex's gaze that made her uneasy. Alex briefed her on the new concept, requiring her to review every detail of the design execution, from material selection to layout arrangements. He seemed to be monitoring not only the technical aspects, but also how Nina reacted to each new responsibility. What Nina didn't yet understand was what was truly at stake. For Alex, this project wasn't just another test of her leadership abilities. It was also a way to test his own ability to trust someone again, to delegate, to let down his guard. In the days that followed, Alex and Nina's interactions became even more intense. Every discussion about the project felt like a personal battle, a silent exchange of power and influence. Their dialogues carried an emotional weight that Nina couldn't avoid, and though she tried to focus solely on work, her mind often returned to Alex's penetrating gaze, his deep voice, the calculated way he seemed to study her every reaction. When she tried convincing herself it was just a leadership strategy, she'd recall brief moments when he seemed genuinely impressed by her ideas, her concepts, her determination. One afternoon, as they finalized the project's finishes, Alex invited her to the company's terrace, where she had never been. The city's cold wind blew, and they could see the urban landscape stretching as far as the eye could see. He watched her in silence, as if waiting for her to take the initiative. "This project means a lot to me, Nina," he finally said, breaking the silence, his voice softer than usual. "But I see that, for you, this is more than just a professional opportunity. Tell me, what exactly drives you to dedicate yourself so much?" Nina looked at him, surprised. It was the first time Alex showed a genuine interest in understanding her personal motivations. For a brief moment, she hesitated, unsure if she should open up. But Alex's gaze was piercing, and although he maintained his serious demeanor, there was an unexpected vulnerability there, something Nina had never imagined seeing. "The truth is, I've always had a vision, and I think this project allows me to make that a reality," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "It's not just a job. It's a chance to prove to myself that I can create something meaningful, that I can leave a mark. Working with you, challenging as it is, has been an experience that pushes me to be better, to go beyond limits I didn't know I had." Her words seemed to surprise him. Alex remained silent, reflecting, and something in his eyes shifted slightly, as if Nina's admission had removed an invisible barrier between them. In a subtle gesture, he turned his gaze to the horizon, as if seeking in the city lights a way to process what he felt. "I know what it's like to want to leave a mark," he said, with a sincerity that until then seemed unattainable. "For a long time, everything I did was to restore the honor my family lost." He paused, as if it was difficult for him to admit it, but he continued. "And ironically, the more I tried to build something solid, the lonelier I felt." Nina felt a pang in her chest. For the first time, she saw beyond Alex's unshakable facade. He wasn't just an authoritarian boss, but a man carrying the weight of an unresolved past. The coldness, the excessive demands, the distrust towards her, it all started to make sense. The next few minutes were marked by a comfortable silence until Alex stepped back, regaining his composure, as if the moment of vulnerability had abruptly ended. He resumed his serious expression and returned to his pragmatic tone. "We have a lot of work ahead. Don't lose focus." And with that, he bid her goodbye. In the days that followed, the dynamic between them shifted in subtle yet noticeable ways. Alex's demands continued, but he seemed more willing to listen to Nina's opinions, to discuss ideas without imposing them unilaterally. Nina, on the other hand, felt the line between admiration and resentment growing ever thinner. As deadlines approached and technical challenges mounted, she realized that what was at stake wasn't just the project's success, but something greater and more. COMPLICA-ED. Their relationship itself, a web of emotions both tried to ignore. An upcoming company event revealed even more about this change. Alex and Nina ended up seated at the same table, surrounded by other executives and investors. During dinner, the atmosphere was tense, but unlike the confrontations they typically had at the office, there was a perceptible emotional weight between them, a silence that said more than any words could. At the end of the event, Alex asked to speak with her privately. The conversation was brief but full of meaning. He acknowledged her efforts and mentioned that the project was advancing impressively thanks to her dedication and talent. Nina, surprised by the compliment, thanked him but couldn't resist asking the question that had been on her mind for some time. "Why did you assign me this project? After everything, the difficulties, the obstacles, I never really understood the real reason." Alex hesitated for a second, as if trying to find a simple answer to something extremely complex. His eyes held hers deeply, as if each word carried an unbearable weight. "Maybe because I needed someone like you to challenge me," he responded with a tone almost imperceptibly tinged with regret. "Someone who wouldn't be afraid to go against the rules." Silence fell between them, but it was a comfortable silence, a momentary truce amid so many battles. Alex's admission seemed to break the final barrier that remained between them, and for the first time, Nina felt she understood the man behind the CEO's implacable facade. This wasn't just a professional project. For both of them, it was a test of trust, a way to understand who they really were and what they desired. After that night, the relationship between Alex and Nina took an even more intense turn. Meetings continued to be tense, but now there was a mutual understanding, a respect that transcended workplace formalities. Every word, every gesture seemed loaded with hidden meanings, as if they were constantly testing the boundaries of what they felt for each other. On one of the project's busiest days, they found themselves at the office late at night. Alex was reviewing documents while Nina finished a report. Exhaustion was visible on both of them, but neither wanted to be the first to leave. Finally, after hours of silence, Alex approached her with an expression Nina couldn't entirely decipher. "Thank you for this," he said in a low, almost inaudible tone. Nina looked up, surprised. Alex's face was close, his eyes watching her with an intensity that seemed to mix gratitude with something deeper. She remained silent, her heart racing, as he observed every detail of her face. In a moment that lasted only a few seconds, but felt like an eternity, Alex leaned slightly closer, as if he were about to kiss her. However, he stopped, hesitating, as if torn between desire and his own restraint. Nina hesitated too, aware that if anything happened there, the consequences could be irreversible. Yet, the intensity of that moment was undeniable, and she felt that, no matter how much they tried to avoid it, something between them had already changed irreversibly. The visit to the project site was something Nina eagerly awaited, as she would finally see her ideas beginning to take shape. The building under construction was a symbol of bold innovation and design, a perfect reflection of both her and Alex's ambitions. That morning, the air was muggy, and the construction team was already hard at work when she and Alex arrived on site. It was unusual for them to be together for field visits, but Alex insisted on attending, claiming that as the project leader, he also needed to ensure everything was progressing as planned. The site was bustling, with workers moving everywhere and trucks unloading materials in constant motion. Nina felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. It was rare for projects to achieve this level of visibility and investment, and knowing that Alex trusted her, even with all the challenges he imposed, only heightened her determination. She moved closer to the area where one of the main structures was being assembled. It was a crucial part of the design, an imposing archway serving as the entrance to the building. Eyes shining with enthusiasm, Nina bent down to closely examine the installation details, moving carefully within the confined space. However, in a moment of distraction, while reaching for a tool that had fallen, she slipped on a pile of sand beside her. The ground rushed up in a blur of seconds, and she barely had time to process what was happening. Then she felt a pair of firm arms catching her, stopping her fall. When she opened her eyes, she saw Alex holding her tightly, his face mere inches from hers. There was something in his eyes, a mix of relief and surprise, and perhaps even a touch of something else he couldn't quite hide. For a moment, time seemed to stop. She could smell his subtle cologne, fresh and distinctive, and feel the warmth of his hands on her arms. It was as if, in that brief moment, the world around them had vanished, leaving only the two of them, immersed in a bubble of silence and electricity. Alex took a second longer than necessary to release her, and when he did, his expression returned to its usual state, impassive, serious, with only a faint hint of concern. Nina straightened, trying to regain her composure as she felt her face grow warm. She knew he wouldn't let the situation go without some comment, and expected some kind of reprimand about her lack of caution. Instead, he merely watched her for a moment longer, his dark eyes examining every detail of her face, as if searching for something beyond a scratch. "Be more careful next time, Miss Park. A successful project depends not only on smart decisions, but also on common sense and safety," he said, in a controlled tone, though softer than usual, as if struggling to maintain the emotional distance he always cultivated. Nina nodded, trying to focus on anything other than how that touch had made her heart race. The Cold War between them continued, but that moment had planted something different in the air between them, something they avoided acknowledging, but that became increasingly evident. Throughout the day, she tried to ignore the memory of those strong hands in his gaze, which seemed unable to hide a trace of genuine concern. She was used to Alex's seriousness, but that concern was something new. During breaks, Nina found herself glancing at him whenever she thought he wasn't looking. For his part, Alex maintained his usual demeanor, but occasionally, she caught him casting quick looks in her direction. Both were clearly avoiding any prolonged eye contact, as if the moment between them was something forbidden, something they preferred to ignore to avoid complicating their professional relationship further. At lunchtime, as the team dispersed to eat, Alex called Nina for a brief conversation in the makeshift office they had set up at the site. When she entered, he was standing beside a table covered with blueprints and project documents. His gaze was fixed on the papers, but there was a tension in his posture, indicating he wasn't as focused as he appeared. "I need to know if you're comfortable with the work pace we've set," he said, without preamble. "The project demands a high level of commitment, and I know the deadlines and expectations aren't easy to meet." Nina felt a twinge of surprise. It was the first time he showed direct concern for her well-being. Normally, Alex simply assumed she could handle everything without question. She crossed her arms, trying to maintain a calm expression. "I'm handling the pressure well, Mr. Donovan. If I need anything, I'll let you know. But so far, I think we're moving along as expected." He observed her in silence, as if seeking confirmation beyond her words. Nina noticed he seemed to be searching for any sign of weakness, but she refused to show any indication of exhaustion, even though she knew she was tired. She sensed that this was yet another of Alex's silent provocations, a way to remind both of them that, despite what had happened earlier, the hierarchy between them remained. "Very well. Just make sure what happened earlier doesn't happen again. "I don't want you distracted by details that can be delegated to the team," he said, maintaining a pragmatic tone. However, Nina could feel that the severity in his voice was a front, perhaps a way to cover up the moment of closeness they had shared. She merely nodded, realizing that any insistence on clarifying the incident would lead to an uncomfortable conversation for both. As she left the office, her mind still echoed the tone of Alex's voice, the coldness and professionalism he insisted on maintaining as a constant barrier. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore the fact that that brief moment of closeness had left a mark, like a spark refusing to fade. In the following weeks, the routine grew even more intense. Alex and Nina's interactions were frequent, and although they tried to maintain professionalism, the incident from the accident hung over them like an inescapable memory. In meetings and technical discussions, both avoided unnecessary physical proximity, and Nina noticed that Alex was more distant than ever, as if the need to keep his distance was now even more urgent. One afternoon, however, an unforeseen event brought their discomfort back to the surface. A problem with the building's structure required an emergency site visit, and Alex insisted that Nina accompany him. They arrived together at the floor where construction had halted due to a structural error detected during inspection. It was a dangerous area where few people were allowed entry, and Alex, in an unexpected gesture, extended his hand to help Nina cross an improvised ladder leading to the critical point of the structure. She accepted the gesture, though she avoided looking at him directly. Upon reaching the highest point, where they could view the work in progress, Alex pointed to the steel beams needing adjustment and began explaining what he expected to be done. Nina listened intently, though she felt the discomfort of being so close to him in a tight space, isolated from the rest of the team. In a moment of distraction, as she observed the metal structures, Nina briefly lost her balance, and instinctively, Alex caught her again. This time, the touch was more subtle, but the effect was just as intense. She found herself in his arms for the second time in a few weeks, and both remained still, as if the touch had the power to freeze time. It was inevitable. The tension between them had transformed into something more palpable, something they could no longer ignore. She could feel the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of his shirt, and he, in turn, seemed to struggle internally, as if every fiber of his being resisted the urge to move even closer. They separated quickly, both looking away, as if the contact was a mistake they preferred to forget. Alex adjusted his posture, taking a deep breath, and said something about site safety, but Nina could barely process his words. Everything around seemed distant and out of focus, except for his presence and the memory of that touch. In the following days, they maintained an even more cautious distance. There was an unspoken tension between them, as if each conversation was an effort to avoid what they truly wanted to say. The furtive glances, the avoided touches, and the charged silence were signs that something had irrevocably changed, even though neither was willing to admit it. In the weeks after the second incident on site, both Alex and Nina intensified their efforts to maintain a professional distance. The tension between them made every encounter inevitably charged with hidden meanings and unsettling silences. Every time their eyes met, the memory of their moments of closeness made them silently pull back, almost like an unspoken promise to avoid any further intimacy. The projects continued, but Alex became even more rigorous. He took on an uncompromising control over every detail, turning each review into a meticulous process where Nina had to constantly defend her work. Cameron Corp's annual gala, held in the main hall of a luxurious hotel, was the kind of event everyone looked forward to, yet few had time to prepare for. The evening promised formal conversations, polite exchanges, and animated speeches celebrating the company's success. But Alex Donovan faced the occasion with his usual indifferent expression. He knew these gatherings were a chance for the team to unwind, but for him, it was just another task, an event he had to attend to keep up appearances. When he entered the hall, Alex quickly noticed that eyes turned his way. Dressed in a dark suit that made him seem even more serious and distant, he exuded an intimidating presence. He engaged in brief conversations with the directors, greeting people with a light smile, but excusing himself whenever discussions dragged on too long. Across the hall, Nina Park stood out among her colleagues. Wearing a simple yet elegant dress, she drew attention with her confident presence and discreet smile as she chatted with the team. Since joining Cameron Corp, Nina knew that every social event was an opportunity to strengthen her network and reaffirm her professional image. But that evening, a latent restlessness lingered. She knew that eventually, she'd cross paths with Alex, and the mere thought of it made her heart race. Minutes passed until inevitably, they found themselves in the same group. After a few minutes of professional conversation about company projects, the two ended up sitting next to each other. The room was filled with voices, but the space around them seemed to hold a different weight. Every movement, every word between them seemed loaded with hidden meanings. Alex maintained his posture, trying to ignore her proximity, yet he felt the tension between them like an electric current. When one of the directors praised Nina's achievements and the positive impact she was bringing to the company, Alex felt compelled to acknowledge her work as well. However, he did so in such a discreet and impersonal manner that it almost came across as a veiled insult. Nina smiled politely but couldn't resist a touch of sarcasm in her response. "I'm glad you noticed, Mr. Donovan. It's not easy earning recognition amid so many demands, but it seems I'm managing." Alex glanced at her, noticing the irony in her words, and something inside him stirred. For a moment, he forgot about the others at the table, losing sight of the demeanor he typically maintained, and responded in a quieter, more challenging tone. "Don't be mistaken, Miss Park. Recognition comes to those willing to do what's necessary, but it's never an easy path." Nina held his gaze, feeling the intensity in those dark eyes she tried so hard to avoid. There was something in his words that struck deeply, as if he was testing her patience, and at the same time, provoking her to see how much she could take. Before she realized it, her tone lowered as well, and she responded just as incisively. "I know exactly what it takes, Mr. Donovan. The difference is that I don't see the need to impose unnecessary obstacles just to prove it." The silence between them was palpable, and others at the table exchanged uneasy glances, sensing a tension beyond a mere professional discussion. Alex seemed torn between replying and maintaining his composure, but suddenly, he made a decision. He stood up from the table and, looking at Nina, spoke in a firm tone filled with an urgency that was hard to ignore. "Miss Park, I'd like to discuss something further about the project. Would you join me for a moment?" Nina nodded without a word, though her heart pounded uncontrollably. She knew this was an excuse, but she followed Alex down a more secluded hallway from the main hall all the same. When they reached a quiet spot, away from curious eyes, he turned to her, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Why do you keep challenging me, Nina?" he asked, his voice blending frustration with a trace of admiration. "It's as if you can't accept that some things need to be done a certain way, yet you insist on questioning it." Nina looked at him, feeling the weight of his words, and moved slightly closer, determined not to back down. "Maybe because I believe not everything has to be the way you impose it." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully, though her voice trembled with emotion. "Alex, this isn't just about work, is it?" The question slipped from her lips before she could stop it. He was silent, his face taking on a tense, almost vulnerable expression. For a moment, she saw what he struggled to hide, sensing they were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. "I don't know what you're getting at, Nina," he said, looking away, though his voice betrayed the control he tried so hard to maintain. "We have a job to do, and I'm only trying to make sure everything goes according to plan." She shook her head, a disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. Her frustration was evident, and when she spoke again, her voice was loaded with restrained emotions. "Alex, I know there's something between us, and you do too. Frankly, I'm tired of pretending it doesn't matter." She took a deep breath, trying to control the impulse drawing her closer to him. Alex's expression shifted, as if each of her words struck him deeply. Before he could stop himself, he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His gaze met hers, and in that instant, there were no more barriers, no rationality or professional pretense. He raised a hand to her face, hesitating only for a second, but unable to hold back. His fingers lightly touched her skin, and in almost impulsive act, he pulled her closer, pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was intense and filled with repressed emotions, as if they had both been waiting for that moment since their first clash. Nina felt his warmth, the urgency in his touch, and responded with equal intensity, letting go of any thoughts of responsibility or consequences. In that moment, all that mattered was Alex's presence, the warmth of his body, the soft pressure of his lips, which seemed to ask for everything while revealing all he had kept hidden. The depth of the kiss conveyed feelings words could never express, a latent desire they had both harbored, but always refused to acknowledge. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, and the silence between them was dense. Nina looked at him, surprised at herself and how much she had wanted this moment, and saw that he was just as stunned. Alex's hand remained on her face, his eyes revealing a mix of regret and desire he couldn't hide. That was a mistake," he murmured, lowering his hand and stepping back slightly, though his expression told a different story. "We shouldn't have." She interrupted him, her voice still trembling with emotion. "Maybe it was a mistake, Alex, but it was honest. And honesty is something we haven't had much of with each other." He looked at her, as if her words hit him with full force. For an instant, the relentless, controlled Alex seemed to hesitate, struggling to process everything that had just happened between them. But the tension was unsustainable, and he quickly raised his defenses, stepping back with a hardened expression. "I don't want this to interfere with our work. We need to stay focused, understand?" He spoke more to himself than to her, as if trying to convince them both they could simply ignore what had happened. Nina nodded, but she knew his words were hollow. Whatever was between them was growing, and it wouldn't be ignored so easily. Without another word, she returned to the hall, her heart still racing as she tried to process the emotions swirling inside her. She knew that kiss would change everything between them, and though she didn't know what to expect, she couldn't help but feel a strange excitement at what might come next. When Alex returned, his expression was calm, controlled, but Nina could see the tension in his shoulders and how he avoided meeting her gaze. Both knew this was the start of a new chapter, where their professionalism would be tested in ways neither could have predicted. After the kiss he had shared with Nina, Alex Donovan isolated himself in his office, trying to reorganize his thoughts. That moment between them, intense and unexpected, lingered like a spark still burning in his memory. Alex knew that sooner or later, he would need to confront what he felt for Nina. However, as a man who had built his life around control and precision, vulnerability felt like a threat. The idea of his team sensing this personal distraction left him anxious. He needed to maintain everyone's respect, ensure that nothing interfered with his leadership and the order he maintained at Cameron Corp. And to him, the attraction to Nina was precisely the kind of deviation he had to avoid. With this fixed idea in mind, Alex decided to adopt an even more reserved stance. If he had already kept a carefully calculated professional distance before, he now intended to reinforce those barriers at all costs. In the days that followed, he made a point to avoid unnecessary interactions with her, limiting himself to the essentials and maintaining a neutral, almost indifferent tone. In the few moments they needed to discuss a project detail, Alex barely looked up, responding succinctly and directly, as if he had decided that the professional boundaries between them could never be crossed again. Yet every time he saw her, a wave of repressed emotions flooded him. Nina's face, her voice, the soft touch he still felt on his lips, all of it haunted him silently, a constant reminder of what he was trying to ignore. He began to question his own sanity, trying to convince himself that this urge was merely a temporary distraction. However, the more he tried to distance himself, the more he realized that his feelings for her went beyond simple physical attraction. There was something deeper, something he was reluctant to admit, yet it drew him in more each time, even when he was resolute in avoiding any closeness. On the other hand, Nina felt torn between anger and a growing desire she couldn't control. Since the kiss, she could barely sleep, haunted by the memory of that moment every minute of the day. The way Alex had acted since left her confused and hurt. It was clear he was determined to keep his distance, to reinforce a barrier she barely understood. And this indifference made her question whether he had felt something genuine, or if it had simply been a momentary lapse he now sought to remedy. Nina was angry not only at his coldness but also at her own inability to control her feelings. Part of her wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation for how he was treating her as if that kiss had never happened. But another part was lost in a mixture of frustration and desire. She knew it would be best to move on and stay focused on work, yet every time Alex appeared, it was as if everything around her lost meaning, and her heart involuntarily raced. It was unbearable, yet she couldn't help it. To make matters worse, the occasional glances they exchanged in the hallways only heightened the tension between them. Alex tried to maintain control, but Nina noticed, in moments of distraction, that he looked at her with the same desire she felt. However, he always quickly looked away, regaining his composure as if determined to erase any evidence of what had happened between them. This oscillation of emotions made the situation unbearable for her, as she no longer knew how to handle it without losing control. The atmosphere between them became even more charged when Alex, seemingly determined to prove his point, decided to involve Neo in a new project. It was an important opportunity, and he justified the choice by saying she was the most competent person to lead the initiative. But for Nina, it was clear there was more than a mere professional assignment. He was testing her, imposing demands that seemed intended to challenge her, perhaps in the hope that by focusing intensely on work, they could both bury what they felt. Amid these conflicting emotions, Nina threw herself into the project, working tirelessly to prove she could handle any challenge he threw her way. She spent nights in the office, reviewing details, meticulously checking every phase of the execution to ensure everything was flawless. She felt determined to show she could meet Alex's expectations, even if he acted as if that kiss had meant nothing. However, on one particularly long night, after hours of solitary work, Alex appeared at the office. He had stayed late himself, reviewing contracts, but seeing the light on in Nina's office, he decided to approach. When he found her sitting at the desk, surrounded by papers and engrossed in work, he felt a wave of conflicting feelings. On one hand, he admired her dedication and professionalism. On the other, he felt a pang of frustration at how much she affected him, even from a distance. Nina looked up when she saw him entering, surprised, yet she showed no emotion beyond the professionalism both insisted on maintaining. He drew closer, pulling a chair beside her and closely examining the documents scattered on the desk. "You shouldn't be working alone at this hour, Miss Park," he said, with a tone mixing concern and a hint of provocation. "It's easy to make mistakes when you're tired." Nina responded without hesitation, keeping a firm expression. "I'm handling the workload well, Mr. Donovan. If I'm here, it's because I want to make sure the project is perfect." Alex remained silent for a moment, observing her with a mix of frustration and fascination. He knew that despite his efforts to keep his distance, he felt irresistibly drawn to her, to the determination in her eyes, to the way she faced every challenge. And even as he tried to push away any feeling that might undermine his leadership, the attraction was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The tension between them intensified with every second. Both were aware of what was between them, yet neither wanted to give in, each fighting to keep up a facade of coldness. Until, in a moment of absent-mindedness, Alex let slip a comment that subtly betrayed what he felt. "It's admirable to see your dedication, Miss Park. Few would be willing to sacrifice so much for their work." Nina caught the underlying message in his words, and her reaction was mixed. On one hand, She wanted to face that attraction head-on, forcing him to confront what they felt. On the other, the anger and confusion his behavior caused made her hold back. "I give my best, Mr. Donovan, because it's what the position demands. But it seems there's something more here, something you're not admitting," she replied, keeping her gaze fixed on him. He quickly looked away, visibly unsettled by her insinuation, yet without denying what she had said. Instead, he muttered a brief goodnight and left, leaving her alone and more confused than ever. The morning of the trip was filled with a strange tension. Ever since learning about the out-of-town project inspection, Nina had tried to ignore the unease that came with knowing she'd be alone with Alex. The past few days had been an emotional roller coaster, and the thought of traveling with him, spending hours next to the man who seemed to dominate her thoughts, made her heart race. But as the project lead, she had no choice. She'd have to face the situation with utmost professionalism, even if latent insecurities threatened to surface. Upon arriving at the airport, she found Alex already waiting, dressed in a dark suit that accentuated his air of authority. He greeted her with a brief, formal nod, though Nina noticed an almost imperceptible hesitation in his gaze. Both were intent on focusing on work, but the tension between them was evident, even if it was something neither would admit. During the flight, Nina and Alex sat side by side, each absorbed in their own thoughts. She tried to focus on project reports, but his presence beside her was an inescapable distraction. The sound of his voice as he made observations about the project, the way he analyzed each detail with an almost obsessive precision, made her both admire his dedication and feel uneasy. Every word he spoke seemed to carry hidden meanings, as if there was something more he wanted to express but couldn't. After a few hours of flying, Alex suggested a break from work. He invited her for coffee in the service area of the cabin, where they could talk away from documents and screens. Hesitant, Nina agreed, feeling her heart quicken at the thought of being in a less formal setting with him. When they settled in, Alex took a sip of his coffee, his gaze drifting to the window where clouds passed like silent shadows. "We've worked together for a while now, but I hardly know anything about you," he began, his tone a mix of curiosity and caution. "I'm usually very private about my personal life, but maybe in this case, it's important we understand each other a bit better." Nina took a deep breath, surprised by the shift in his behavior. She had never heard him discuss anything personal, and this sudden openness made her wonder if he was genuinely willing to break down some of his barriers. Deciding to reciprocate, she shared a little of her own story, revealing snippets about her life before Cameron Corp, her ambitions, her dedication to the work, and especially how much she valued the project they were developing. Gradually, Alex also began to open up, sharing aspects of his life she'd never imagined. He spoke about the weight of his family legacy, the pressures he had faced over the years, and his struggle to trust others. His words carried an unexpected honesty, and Nina realized that beneath the cold, calculating man was someone deeply affected by family issues and old traumas. Each revelation seemed to deepen the connection between them, as if every word slowly dissolved the barriers they had held in place. As the flight went on, the conversation grew increasingly intimate. The proximity, the gestures, the exchanged glances all contributed to an atmosphere that went beyond professional boundaries. Nina, who had initially felt anxious, now found herself fascinated by Alex's more human side. She realized he wasn't just a demanding boss, but a man who, despite his front of self-sufficiency, carried insecurities that made him seem less distant, more real. When they reached their destination, the city was cold and uninviting, but their shared enthusiasm for the project made it all more bearable. In the car taking them to the hotel, the physical closeness reignited a perceptible tension. Alex's hand rested casually on the seat, mere inches from Nina's, and she felt his presence almost tangibly. The desire she'd tried to ignore all day only seemed to intensify. She tried to redirect her thoughts, but any attempt to rationalize was futile. Alex, in turn, kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead, but his serious expression betrayed the same discomfort Nina felt. Upon arriving at the hotel, they were informed that due to a booking error, they would have to share a small meeting room to review documents before the next day's inspection. The room was simple, and the forced proximity only heightened the already present tension. As they settled in, Nina tried to ignore the feeling that they were being drawn into dangerous territory, where professionalism could easily be forgotten. Alex began discussing the project, making notes as he passed documents to her, but his voice sounded distant, as though he was preoccupied with something beyond the work. Nina tried to focus, but his presence, his gestures, and the way he leaned in to explain certain details made her heart race. At one point, as they both reached for the same sheet of paper, their hands touched. The electricity she felt was immediate, and although she tried to mask it, it was clear he had noticed too. There was a moment of absolute silence between them, a pause where words seemed unnecessary. The brief yet meaningful touch was enough to remind them of what they had been trying to hide. Alex quickly looked away, but his expression betrayed the effort he was making to control his feelings. He then stepped back, trying to regain control of the situation. "I think we should call it a night," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Tomorrow will be a full day, and rest is essential." Nina nodded, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. Both knew that this proximity only made things more complicated, and it was clear that Alex was trying to maintain as much emotional distance as possible. Still, the attraction between them was something they could no longer deny. Night had fallen over the small town, and the silence surrounding the hotel was broken only by the soft sound of the wind tapping against the windows. After a long day of inspections and meetings at the construction site, Alex and Nina returned to the hotel, exhausted yet still filled with adrenaline from the project's progress. The night seemed to bring a different atmosphere, a calm that contrasted with the day's tension. It felt as though, in that moment, the weight of their responsibilities was replaced by a sense of freedom. Though Alex's presence continued to provoke a restlessness in Nina she could barely hide. After a hot shower, Nina went down to the hotel bar. She needed a moment to relax, to let the day's stress and intense emotions fade. To her surprise, she found Alex already seated at one of the corner tables, a glass of red wine before him and a thoughtful expression on his face, as if lost in his thoughts. He noticed her approach and gestured to the empty seat beside him. Though hesitant, Nina accepted the invitation. Sitting with him in a more relaxed setting felt, in a way, inevitable. They both remained silent for a few minutes, each immersed in their own reflections. The quiet environment and the taste of wine helped ease the tension, and gradually, the formal barrier between them began to dissolve. After a couple of glasses, Nina felt herself relax a little and found the courage to speak about things she would normally avoid. "You know, Alex, a lot of people think that success at work is all that matters," she began, her voice soft and tinged with a hint of bitterness. "But for me, it's more than that. I come from a family that always expected me to take a safe path, to avoid any risk. To them, I was never supposed to be where I am now. Every step in my career has been a challenge, not only to prove to myself that I'm capable, but to show that I can actually make something real." Alex looked at her, surprised by her sudden openness. It was rare to see her open up like that, and he felt a hint of empathy he hadn't expected. He knew all too well what it was like to deal with family expectations and the constant pressure to prove himself. With a sigh, Alex took another sip of wine and, after a few seconds of hesitation, decided to reveal a part of himself he usually kept hidden. "I understand exactly what you're saying, Nina. My family's company going bankrupt was such a hard blow that it left us all shaken. I was young, but I was forced to grow up too fast, to bear a burden that maybe wasn't even mine to bear. When my father lost everything, I watched the strong, determined man he once was turn into someone who could barely face his own reflection. Since then, the fear of failing has haunted me. I work as hard as I do not just to build something for myself, but to restore what my family lost." Alex's words hung in the air, and Nina felt a pang in her chest as she realized that despite his rigid, controlled demeanor, he too carried scars that had shaped who he was. Seeing him open up so honestly made her see him in a new light. Alex wasn't just the strict, calculating boss, but a man deeply marked by his past. Someone who constantly fought to prove he could build something strong and unshakable. Instinctively, she reached out and gently touched his hand in a gesture of silent understanding. Alex looked at the touch, and both felt the intensity of the moment, a connection that transcended any professional or rational boundary. He didn't pull away, but instead intertwined his fingers with hers for a moment, as if that simple gesture of support was something he hadn't experienced in a long time. "You're stronger than you think, Alex," she said with a softness that surprised him. "The pressure you put on yourself is immense, but it's clear how dedicated you are to everything you do. Your father would be proud." He looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise and gratitude. Her words, simple yet sincere, seemed to touch a sensitive point within him, a wound he hadn't realized needed healing. With a gentleness he rarely showed, Alex smiled at her, a discreet but genuine smile that revealed a vulnerability he usually kept hidden. "Thank you, Nina. Sometimes I forget there's more to life than this obsession with control and success. But you make me remember that it's possible to want something more." She smiled back, and in that moment, it felt as though they were both allowing themselves a truce, a pause in the internal battles they fought daily. Each in their own way had built walls to protect themselves from the pains of the past, from expectations, from the fear of failing. But beside each other, they felt that maybe there was a way to overcome these barriers, to find a path where they could be who they truly were without the masks they wore in the workplace. After a few more minutes, the silence between them was no longer heavy, but a pleasant companion. Each absorbed what had been shared, as if those confessions were an anchor connecting them on a deeper level. However, even in the face of their closeness, they both resisted the impulse building within them, the attraction growing stronger with every passing moment. As the night progressed, Nina felt there was more she needed to say, a truth she had held within since she began working with Alex. Taking a deep breath, she found the courage and in an almost whispering tone said, "Alex, I don't know if you realize how hard you are on yourself and on others, but still, there's something about you that makes me want to be near, that makes me want to understand what's behind this facade of absolute control." He looked at her, surprised by her honesty, and saw in her eyes a blend of curiosity and sincerity he rarely encountered in those around him. For a moment, Alex felt the urge to say what he truly felt, to confess that since meeting her, Nina had stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in a long time. But rationality held him back. He knew that if he took that step, the consequences would be unpredictable. With a lower tone and a melancholic smile, he replied, "Maybe that's why I try to keep my distance. You make me question everything, make me feel like I could be different. And honestly, that scares me more than anything." Nina felt a mixture of sadness and understanding. She knew he was fighting his own feelings, that the fear of allowing himself to feel something deeper paralyzed him. But at the same time, that shared moment, the confessions, the gentle touch of their hands, all of it pointed to something they both knew was inevitable. Even if they resisted, even if they tried to deny it, what they felt for each other went beyond any logic. That night, they returned to their rooms carrying unspoken feelings and a new mutual understanding. As much as they resisted, they knew something had changed, that the walls were beginning to crumble, and that sooner or later, they would have to face what they truly felt. Back in the city after the trip, Nina felt that distance was her only chance to protect what was left of her self-control. She knew her feelings for Alex were growing beyond her ability to restrain, and that a deeper involvement could compromise not only her career, but her entire professional outlook, into which she had always invested with intense dedication. Determined, she avoided any unnecessary interaction, maintaining a strict, clear professionalism that bordered on impersonal. The days that followed were filled with intense work hours as Nina buried herself in tasks, hoping to forget the intensity of the moments she had shared with Alex. But unlike her, Alex felt increasingly unsettled. Since the trip, her face had not left his mind. The touch of Nina's hands, the warmth she transmitted, and above all, the raw honesty of her words affected him in an unexpected and unsettling way. Alex was a man who valued control and rarely allowed anything to interfere with his professional life. But since meeting Nina, everything he thought he knew about himself was constantly shifting. She was more than just a competent colleague or an admirable figure. There was something deep and intense about her that he couldn't ignore. He knew he needed to talk to her, to face this directly, even if it forced him to reveal vulnerabilities he preferred to keep hidden. Determined, he finally called Nina to his office one late afternoon. She entered with a cautious expression, as if sensing that this meeting would not be like the others. The tension in the air was palpable, and although she tried to show professionalism, Nina could barely sustain the cold, distant gaze she had maintained since returning from the trip. "Nina," he began, his voice firm yet softer than usual, causing her to feel a mix of relief and apprehension. "We need to talk about what's happening between us." She looked away, taking a moment to steady her breathing. She knew he would bring up this topic, but she still hoped to avoid letting her emotions overflow in the professional space they both struggled to maintain. "I'm not sure there's anything to discuss, Alex." Her voice was controlled but slightly shaky as she tried to ignore the weight pressing on her chest. "Maybe it was just a moment. And as professionals, we don't need to complicate things." Alex remained silent for a few seconds, watching her closely. He knew she was resisting, trying to maintain a distance that no longer made sense. He approached her with a calm that disguised the intensity of his feelings until only a small space remained between them. "I can't get you out of my head, Nina," he confessed, his voice carrying the sincerity that disarmed any resistance she still held. "Since the moment we met, you've challenged me, made me question every choice, every decision. I thought I could simply ignore it, but this isn't something I want to forget." Those words struck her like a confession she both feared and deeply longed to hear. Nina felt her heart race and her hands grow cold, as though every nerve in her body was on high alert. She knew she was on the verge of giving in, but still fought to keep a facade that would protect her from everything he represented. She needed to believe she could hold on to control, but deep down, she felt that battle had been lost since the first moment their eyes met. "Alex, it's complicated," she whispered, struggling to keep her voice steady. I can't allow myself distractions. My focus has always been on work, and you, above all, are my boss." Alex took another step toward her, closing the distance with a softness that only heightened the tension between them. He looked at her, his eyes bright with an intensity that revealed how much he, too, was fighting against his own fears. "I know it's complicated, Nina, and I know we've both built lives where control and focus are everything. But since you came into my life, I've realized some things simply can't be controlled." Nina looked at him, feeling each word of his chip away at the walls she had built so carefully. She tried to resist, but it was impossible to ignore what he stirred within her. In a moment of weakness, she allowed herself to look at him directly, letting him see everything she had been hiding in her eyes. And then, as if it were inevitable, she felt his hands touch hers warm, firm, comforting. Before she could rationalize it, she felt Alex pulling her closer, and his lips met hers with controlled intensity, full of desire. The kiss was deep, and she felt every suppressed emotion break free in that instant. The soft touch of his hands on her face, his breath against hers, everything seemed to amplify what they had been fighting so hard to conceal. This time, the kiss wasn't impulsive or driven by external circumstances. It was a choice, a mutual and conscious surrender. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, and the silence that settled between them was laden with unspoken feelings. Nina looked at him, a mix of surprise and fear at what this moment meant for them. He, in turn, kept his hands on her face, as if wanting to prolong that moment of closeness. "This isn't something I can ignore," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "And I don't think you can either." Nina felt a pang in her chest. She knew he was right, that what they felt wasn't something that could simply be erased. But the complications and fears still loomed over her like shadows. "Alex, this could be dangerous. I don't want it to ruin everything I've worked for. I'm not sure I can handle this." He nodded, understanding her concern. He too knew he was taking a risk by letting his emotions take over, but at that moment, nothing seemed to matter more than what he felt for her. Alex pulled her into a silent embrace, and she allowed herself to relax in his arms, feeling that maybe, in that moment, everything was as it should be. "I won't let this interfere with anything, Nina," he whispered. "But I also won't pretend I don't feel this for you." "Not anymore." Their embrace was interrupted only when they heard footsteps outside the office, and almost instinctively, they quickly separated, trying to regain their composure. Alex looked at her, offering a slight smile that held a mix of complicity and an unspoken promise. Nina, meanwhile, felt vulnerable yet incredibly alive. In the days that followed Alex and Nina's last kiss, the air at Cameron Corp felt heavier, as if the office walls were imbued with the restless silence lingering between them. The realization that something profound had formed between them was undeniable, but along with this feeling came doubts, fears, and hesitations. From the moment they had surrendered to their mutual attraction, both knew the path ahead would be difficult and full of obstacles, and this became more evident each time their eyes met. Alex, who had always prided himself on his ability to maintain control, now found himself facing a dilemma that shook his sense of security. He knew his feelings for Nina were genuine, yet he feared that a relationship between them could become a dangerous distraction, something that might compromise not only the professional environment, but also both their ambitions and futures. Deep inside, a voice told him to pull away, to preserve the order he had always maintained in his life, and avoid the risks this involvement posed. However, another part, deeper and more sincere, resisted the idea of letting her go. Since Nina had entered his life, something within Alex had changed, something he never thought possible. She was more than just a colleague or a talented professional. She made him see the world differently, challenging him, inspiring him, and awakening feelings he thought he had buried. But rationality prevailed, and day by day, Alex tried to convince himself that the best course for both of them would be to end what they had started before things became even more complicated. After days of hesitation, he finally decided he needed to talk to her. He called her in for a meeting at the end of the day, a private conversation he knew would be difficult, but necessary. When Nina entered the room, she noticed the tension on Alex's face and felt a pang of apprehension. Since their last kiss, the distance he maintained had hurt her, and she feared what he might say in this meeting. Alex began hesitantly, choosing his words carefully. "Nina, I need to talk about what's happening between us." He paused, visibly uncomfortable, as though the mere confession of his feelings was already an enormous challenge. "I know there's something strong, something that's hard to ignore." Nina watched him closely, waiting for him to continue, her heart beating faster with each word. But what he said next surprised and disarmed her completely. "But I also have reservations." Alex lowered his gaze, his voice carrying a sadness she had never sensed in him before. "Nina, what we have, it could put everything at risk for both you and me. I don't want this to jeopardize your career or interfere with how we're seen here." His words were rational, logical, but to Nina, they sounded like a retreat, an attempt to end something that had barely begun. She felt a mix of frustration and hurt, as though all her efforts to keep this involvement safe were being dismissed in an instant. Taking a deep breath, she tried to contain her emotions, but the pain in her chest was nearly unbearable. "Alex, do you really think I'm incapable of handling this?" Her voice came out low but filled with resentment. "I got involved knowing the risks, knowing it wouldn't be easy, but also knowing that what I feel for you is real, and now you want to just end it so that nothing is affected? You think I can't handle this?" He looked at her, seeing the sincerity and hurt in her eyes, and felt torn. More than anything, Alex wanted to accept what he felt, but the responsibility he always carried weighed even more heavily on his heart. Seeing her so vulnerable made him realize just how much this feeling affected him, how much he wanted to fight his own logic and simply surrender to what they felt. But instead of stepping closer, he kept his distance, trying to preserve the order he believed was necessary. "It's not that, Nina." His voice sounded heavy, almost as if confessing he was struggling against himself. "I know you're strong. I know you could handle it. But I'm afraid. Afraid that if we go forward, everything we've built could be damaged. That you could be harmed because of me." Nina felt tears threatening to rise, but she held them back, determined not to show weakness. Frustration and hurt mixed within her, and part of her wanted to understand, but another refused to accept the situation. "If you really felt something, Alex, you wouldn't be putting these concerns above what we're experiencing." Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "I came into this with an open heart, and you're trying to maintain control that, deep down, is only destroying you." He looked at her, grasping the depth of her words, and feeling that perhaps he was on the verge of losing something he would never find again. But his insecurity and fear of losing control overpowered him, and he simply nodded, lacking the courage to argue. "Maybe you're right, Nina. Maybe I'm doing this wrong, but right now, I can't ignore these fears. I can't." Nina felt her heart break, and in silence, she left the room. She knew he was battling deep feelings, but she couldn't bear the idea of remaining in a situation where everything she felt was questioned and subjected to so much fear and restraint. She decided it might be best to pull away, to end the involvement that made her feel so vulnerable. After leaving, she walked down the hallway with steady steps, though the weight of the decision struck her more with each step. She felt she had fought as hard as she could, but if he wasn't willing to accept the risks, then maybe there was no place for the relationship she had dreamed of. After her conversation with Alex, Nina felt as if each day at Cameron Corp was a struggle to hide the pain and frustration she carried. She forced herself to keep her head high, showing impeccable professionalism, but her heart was broken. Every glance she cast at Alex, every time she saw him in a meeting or passing by in the hallway, was a constant reminder of what they could have been and of the emptiness he left in her life. She tried her best not to let it show, but the feelings were too intense to be buried so easily. In the first few days after the devastating conversation, Nina threw herself into her work with an almost obsessive intensity. She arrived at the office before everyone else and was the last to leave, avoiding any distractions. She found temporary solace in the sense of control and productivity, as if filling every minute of her day with work could replace the emotional void she felt. Yet, in quiet moments, when the office emptied and the lights dimmed, she was forced to confront the loneliness consuming her, with Alex as a constant presence in her mind, a shadow that refused to fade. No matter how hard she tried to move on, the pain was undeniable and the hurt remained. She wasn't just mourning the loss of her romance that had barely begun. She felt a deep wound to her pride. She had allowed herself to open her heart, to take a risk, only to realize that Alex wasn't willing to do the same. Every memory, every touch, every conversation still echoed in her mind. But now these moments were tinged with frustration and disappointment. Nina knew he felt something strong for her too, but the fact that he wasn't ready to face his fears and accept what they felt hurt her profoundly. Meanwhile, Alex struggled with his own regret and pain that surfaced every time he thought of Nina. He had chosen to distance himself in an effort to protect them both, convinced that maintaining order and professionalism was the best decision. Yet, the coldness and distance he tried to maintain weren't enough to ease the emptiness she left in his life. Alex couldn't avoid the pang of loss he felt each time he saw Nina in the office, an ache he had caused but didn't know how to mend. Their days became a continuous cycle of work and silence, in which they both pretended that everything was normal. Interactions between them, once full of intensity and emotion, were now reduced to formal and brief exchanges. Alex was tormented, but his pride and fear of losing control kept him from taking any action. He was a man accustomed to acting with reason and logic, yet by pushing Nina away, he realized he might have made a mistake that even his discipline couldn't undo. But Nina's emotional resilience didn't last long, and she began questioning her choice to stay at Cameron Corp. The idea of sharing the same environment with Alex every day, of seeing him and working with him while suppressing her feelings, was becoming unbearable. Although she loved her work and valued what she had built there, his presence was a constant reminder of what she saw as a personal and emotional disappointment. For the first time, Nina considered the possibility of looking for new opportunities, of starting over elsewhere, away from any memory that Alex represented. That night, as she sat on her sofa in silence, she reflected on what she truly wanted. Her decision to distance herself from Alex had been painful, but she felt it was necessary to preserve her sanity and dignity. What saddened her was the realization that despite all her efforts to maintain control and distance, her feelings for him remained strong. She wondered why Alex was unable to open his heart, to face what they felt, and was confused when she recalled moments when he had seemed so vulnerable and receptive, as if he wanted everything she wanted, but simply couldn't take the final step. Weeks passed, and although the work routine remained intense, everyone noticed that something had changed between Nina and Alex. Colleagues who were once accustomed to their constant collaboration and rapport now found the coldness between them strange. Rumors about their distancing began to circulate, and some discreetly tried to approach Nina to understand what had happened. She, however, limited herself to polite smiles and changing the subject, keeping her private pains and disappointments to herself. For Alex, the situation had also become unsustainable. He maintained a calm and controlled appearance, but deep down, he felt a growing pressure, a sense of loss he couldn't fully understand. In a moment of weakness, he found himself going through old photos and records of the project he and Nina had worked on together, as if trying to relive the moments of connection that now felt so distant. From time to time, he was overcome with an urge to seek her out, to ask for a second chance, but his pride and fear still held him back, unable to give in to his feelings. One afternoon, after an exhausting meeting filled with minor conflicts, Alex finally reached his breaking point. He had convinced himself that distancing himself was the best choice, but when he saw Nina leave the room without looking at him, without even a hint of emotion, he felt a tightness in his chest that he could no longer ignore. It was as if the silence between them had become unbearable, a barrier suffocating him and keeping him from something he wanted more than he'd ever admit. When he returned to his office, he closed the door and allowed himself a moment of introspection. He looked around, observing the space he had so often shared with Nina, and realized that everything seemed empty and meaningless. The documents, the projects, the goals, none of it seemed as important as what he felt for her. For the first time, he seriously questioned whether what he had lost was greater than any success or stability he aimed to maintain. He had let go of something he considered essential for professional well-being, but reality confronted him with a simple truth. Without Nina, the very meaning of his accomplishment seemed to fade away. With a heavy heart, Alex decided he needed to talk to her, to be honest about everything he felt. The resistance he had maintained was becoming unbearable, and each second that passed without trying to win her back felt like a weight he could no longer bear. He knew it might be too late, but deep down, he desperately hoped that Nina could forgive him, that she would give him a chance to show he was willing to fight for what they felt. However, Nina had already made her decision. That evening, before leaving, she submitted her resignation letter to Human Resources without saying goodbye to Alex in person. After submitting her resignation letter, Nina felt both relief and exhaustion. Everything she had experienced at Cameron Corp now seemed like a weight she was finally free from. even though the decision to leave had been painful. She was mentally preparing to move forward, to build a new path far from Alex and the memories he represented. But she was caught by surprise when she learned that Alex's ex-girlfriend, Victoria, was working behind the scenes to sabotage her work and possibly tarnish her reputation. Victoria, who held an influential position in the company as the head of strategic relations, had always been a complex figure in Alex's life. Ambitious and calculating, her qualities had initially attracted him, but ultimately led to their contentious breakup. From the start, Victoria had been jealous of the connection between Alex and Nina. Victoria's attempts to undermine Nina began subtly, with indirect comments and small acts of sabotage. She would forward important emails with incorrect information, quietly undermining Nina's work. Over time, however, her attacks became more noticeable, to the point where her ill intentions started attracting attention. At first, Alex didn't notice what Victoria was doing. Preoccupied with his own concerns and his dilemma with Nina, he hadn't suspected that his ex might act so pettily. However, as rumors began circulating, and after some of Nina's colleagues mentioned issues in reports and strategic meetings, Alex started connecting the dots. He began investigating quietly, trying to understand what was happening. And after analyzing communications and changes in documents, he realized that Victoria had deliberately altered and deleted information. Alex felt a growing anger upon discovering the extent of Victoria's interference. His disappointment and frustration were immense, both for her lack of professionalism and for the impact her actions had on Nina's work. He had always valued integrity and merit, and the thought that someone would hurt another out of mere jealousy revolted him. But beyond the anger, Alex felt deep guilt. He realized that by keeping his distance, he had left Nina vulnerable to attacks and distrust she didn't deserve. Determined to address the situation, Alex called an emergency meeting with the strategic relations team and company executives, including Victoria. When Nina was informed about the meeting, she was surprised to see her name on the attendee list but decided to go, intrigued by what might be happening. Upon entering the room, she found Alex standing with a serious expression and determined look, which made her even more curious and a bit apprehensive. Once everyone was present, Alex began the meeting with a cold, direct introduction. "We're here to discuss serious issues of professional conduct that are affecting our work environment and the integrity of our projects," he announced, directing a firm gaze at Victoria, who tried to look away but was compelled to meet his eyes. Nina, confused, watched the situation cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Gradually, Alex began revealing the changes in reports, the omissions of information, the alterations in emails, and the harm done to Nina's work due to these interferences. Victoria kept a serious expression, but the tension on her face was evident. The actions taken not only damaged the work of a dedicated professional, but also put the company's project development at risk, Alex continued, his voice filled with indignation. "We cannot tolerate behavior that undermines our ethics and mutual respect in the workplace." Victoria tried to argue, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but Alex didn't back down. He confronted each of her excuses with evidence of her manipulations, exposing her lack of ethics and the harm she caused. His indignation reflected more than just professional frustration. It was a clear signal of his determination to protect Nina from any injustice. Nina watched, her heart racing. Alex's stance deeply moved her. She had never expected him, someone who often showed coldness and rationality, to be willing to risk his reputation and openly confront Victoria to defend her. Each word he spoke, every gesture of indignation he showed, felt like a silent declaration that he valued her and was by her side, despite all the conflicts and difficulties they had faced. When the meeting ended, Victoria stormed out, leaving a trail of tension in the air. The other executives dispersed in silence, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, but respecting Alex's decision to reveal the truth. Nina remained, still processing everything that had happened, and as everyone finally left, Alex approached her with a look that was a mixture of regret and sincerity. "I'm sorry, Nina," he said, his voice lower and softer. "I should never have let it get to this point. It was a mistake, and I deeply regret that you had to go through this." Nina looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and realized that his act of protection meant more than words could express. She felt a wave of emotions overwhelm her, and the resentment she had harbored began to fade, giving way to renewed admiration. "Alex," she began, hesitant, but with emotion in her voice. "Thank you. I didn't expect you to defend me like that." He stepped closer, keeping his gaze fixed on hers, as if wanting to convey the sincerity he felt. "I couldn't do anything less, Nina. I know I've made mistakes, but never doubt how much I care about you." After the intense meeting, Nina was filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and newfound admiration for Alex. He had defended her in a way she never expected. In her mind, Alex's words during the confrontation with Victoria continued to echo, publicly exposing his ex's wrongdoings and intentions with a firmness that surprised everyone. His stance felt like a silent answer to everything she thought she had lost. He had shown that behind the facade of a controlled and pragmatic boss, there was someone willing to take risks for her. In Alex's eyes, Nina saw a rare sincerity, as if he himself were allowing himself to feel something he had kept hidden. After the other executives left, Nina stayed in the empty conference room beside Alex, each absorbed in their own thoughts. His words continued to resonate, and for the first time, she felt valued and understood. Alex looked away for a moment, seeming to measure his words before speaking again. "I didn't want you to go through this, Nina," he said, lowering his voice. "After everything that happened between us, it was the last thing I wanted. I should have been more attentive. I should have noticed what Victoria was doing much sooner. It wasn't your fault, Alex. You couldn't have predicted she would act this way." Nina replied, surprised by the sincerity in her own tone. For the first time in a long while, she felt the frustration and resentment she had harbored toward him begin to dissipate. Alex took a step closer, his gaze fixed on hers with an intensity that made her hold her breath. In that moment, he seemed to be struggling against his own barriers, and the silence between them was filled with everything they were trying to say without words. Nina knew he was on the verge of saying something significant, and deep inside, she felt an anticipation that left her restless. "Nina, I know I've made mistakes and things between us have become complicated. But what I feel for you is real," Alex confessed, finally breaking the silence. "I couldn't let anyone, not even Victoria, harm you. Not after everything you mean to me." She looked at him, absorbing every word, and felt that the Alex standing before her was a more honest and vulnerable version, someone he had tried to keep hidden until now. Though her instinct was to question him, to demand explanations for the pain he had caused her, she sensed that this moment was a truce, a chance to leave the resentment behind and acknowledge what they had both tried to deny. Without thinking much, Nina took a step forward, placing her hand over his in a gesture of support that surprised her. The touch was simple but laden with an understanding words couldn't convey. He intertwined his fingers with hers, as if fearing she might pull away, and they stood there, in a silence that spoke more than any confession could. "Thank you, Alex." Nina's voice was low, almost a whisper, but he could hear the sincerity in each word. "The truth is, even with everything that happened, I never stopped caring about you." He held her hand a bit tighter, and his gaze showed a mixture of relief and tenderness, as if he was finally standing before something he had longed for but didn't know how to reach. For him, the barriers he had built over the years seemed fragile against what he felt, and for a moment, he felt the courage to confront all the fears that had kept him from admitting what he truly wanted. But before he could say anything, the conference room door suddenly opened, interrupting the moment. One of the executives entered, surprised to see the two still there. Alex quickly released Nina's hand, and she took a step back, trying to regain her composure. though the look they exchanged was enough to reaffirm everything they felt. As soon as the executive left, Nina and Alex exchanged a silent understanding. He gave her a slight smile, and for the first time, she saw a vulnerability in his eyes she had never seen before. They were connected in a deep way, and that gesture of defense, his protective words, and the touch of their hands were only the beginning of something they both knew they could no longer ignore. Back in the professional environment, Alex and Nina worked hard to maintain the discreet posture they had decided on, even though the newly revealed bond between them was stronger than ever. After everything they had gone through and overcome, they felt there was no longer any reason to resist what they felt. However, both knew that to maintain balance at work, they would need to proceed cautiously. Although their routine remained intense, each discreet encounter and exchanged glance in the office seemed to strengthen their connection. It was as if they were living in two worlds. In the first, they were simply Alex Donovan, the CEO, and Nina Park, the talented interior designer. In the second, they were just Alex and Nina, two people caught up in a powerful passion. At night, away from curious eyes, Alex and Nina allowed themselves moments of intimacy, like a couple who had finally found each other after a long wait. In one of their first meetings away from the office halls, Alex invited her to dinner at a cozy, intimate restaurant where they could talk and enjoy each other's company without worry. The table was lit with a soft glow, and the background music created a warm ambiance, allowing them to forget the outside world. They talked about simple things, laughed at personal stories, and shared confidences, as if they were finally discovering who they really were beyond the formalities of work. Nina felt herself becoming more and more captivated, seeing a side of Alex few knew. He was attentive, funny, and kind, and the way he looked at her made her feel special, as if she were the only person in the world who mattered to him. The vulnerability he showed left her completely disarmed, and she knew that, despite the challenges, this relationship was something she was not willing to lose. Alex, in turn, felt increasingly liberated with Nina by his side. Being with her allowed him to be himself, free from the weight of expectations and responsibilities he had always carried. In her presence, he didn't have to be the unshakable, stoic CEO. He could relax and express his emotions, something he once thought impossible. He realized that each meeting, each conversation, each touch only intensified his feelings for her. And for the first time, he let himself enjoy the happiness she brought him. As their meetings became more frequent, Alex and Nina developed a silent bond that helped them maintain their secret at work. In the office, they avoided being alone together or prolonging conversations, but sometimes they exchanged quick glances and hidden smiles only they understood. These small moments of connection were enough to keep the passion alive and remind them that, though physically distant during the day, they were closer than ever emotionally. One evening, after a long day at work, Alex suggested they spend time at his apartment. It was a private, cozy space where they knew they could relax. As soon as they entered, the quiet, intimate atmosphere enveloped them. Alex pulled her close, holding her firmly, and Nina, in turn, wrapped her arms around him, feeling the warmth and security of his embrace. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood together, savoring the feeling of finally being exactly where they wanted to be. Their kisses were intense, filled with a desire that had been held back for too long. Each touch, each gesture felt like a new discovery, and their shared passion overflowed. The apartment was silent, and in the private space they shared, there was no need for words. Everything they wanted to say was conveyed through glances and smiles, caresses and gestures that confirmed just how much they had longed for this moment. After a while, they settled on the couch, with Alex pulling her close, holding her protectively, as if afraid to lose her. Nina rested her head on his shoulder, feeling at peace, and they stayed there, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. She listened as he shared his ambitions for Cameron Corp, his desire to make the company a model of innovation and excellence. He also encouraged her to share her own dreams, And Nina felt that, for the first time, she had someone by her side who not only listened but genuinely believed in her potential. Over time, the feelings they shared grew deeper, and their secret relationship became an indispensable part of both their lives. Alex felt that Nina made him a better man, and for the first time, he was willing to face any challenge to keep her by his side. Nina also felt herself growing alongside him, learning to balance her professional life with the love she had found. She knew that the journey to this point had been full of obstacles, but she felt stronger and more confident with him by her side. However, even with all their caution, they both knew that keeping the relationship a secret forever wouldn't be feasible. With each passing day, the curious glances at the office intensified, and rumors began to circulate, though subtly. Colleagues whispered about Alex's changed demeanor, the frequency with which both of them stayed late at the office, and the way he seemed more attentive to her work than anyone else's. This growing pressure threatened the peace they had found, and at times, Nina felt uncertain about the relationship's future. One quiet night, while they were together in Alex's apartment, she decided to express her concerns. Sitting on the balcony under the gentle starlight, she gathered the courage to address the issue that had been bothering her for days. "Alex, do you think we could keep this going forever?" Nina's voice was low, almost hesitant, as she avoided looking at him directly, fearing his response. Alex remained silent for a moment, reflecting on her words. He knew she was right to be concerned, but at the same time, he felt ready to fight for them, to face any difficulty to protect what they had. He took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, pulling her closer in an attempt to convey the reassurance he felt. "Nina, I don't want this to be a secret forever, but at the same time, I want to do things the right way. I want you to feel safe and protected. I promise we'll find a way to handle everything without jeopardizing what we have." His words comforted her, and she felt wrapped in a newfound sense of trust and security. Alex was the type of man who didn't make impulsive decisions, and hearing the promise in his voice, Nina knew he was committed to her and the future they both wanted to build. Right there, under the starlight, she realized she was willing to face any obstacle as long as he was by her side. Their relationship continued to grow even stronger, and each moment together reaffirmed the silent commitment they had made. The passion and love they shared became the foundation of their lives, and both knew that, despite the challenges, they were willing to fight for what they had found in each other. The unexpected job offer from another company came to Nina at a time that completely took her by surprise. It was an enticing opportunity, offering a position of greater responsibility and a substantial salary increase, along with challenging projects that could elevate her career to a new level. However, the mere thought of leaving Cameron Corp and leaving Alex created a feeling of intense conflict within her. She was torn between her desire for professional growth and the fear that accepting the offer might put her relationship with Alex at risk. After days of reflection, Nina knew she needed to talk to Alex. She didn't want to make such a significant decision without discussing it with him, but she also feared his reaction. They had endured so many challenges to be together, and although she hoped he would understand her dilemma, a part of her feared he might interpret her consideration of the offer as a sign of disloyalty or an intent to leave him. When she finally told Alex about the offer, his reaction was immediate and intense. He frowned, looked away, and crossed his arms in a defensive gesture. It was as if the news had completely blindsided him, and his expression was a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and something deeper that Nina couldn't immediately decipher. "So you're considering leaving Cameron Corp?" he asked, his voice low and firm, though tinged with a note of hurt. Nina felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice, but took a deep breath, determined to explain her perspective. "Alex, this is an opportunity that could change my career. It's something I've always wanted, and I thought somehow that you'd understand." He let out a short, humorless laugh and shook his head slowly, as if trying to process what he was hearing. "Understand? You think I should understand that you're willing to walk away from everything we've built here? To walk away from us, Nina?" His words were loaded with frustration, and Nina realized he was responding far more emotionally than she had expected. She tried to approach him, seeking some way to ease the tension, but he stepped back, raising his hand as if to keep his distance. For Alex, the idea of Nina accepting a job elsewhere felt like a threat to everything they had built. He felt that by considering this possibility, she was questioning the value of what they shared. As much as he tried to rationalize it, the fear of losing her was overwhelming, and he felt betrayed, as if by accepting the offer, she was turning her back on their relationship. "Alex, I'm not giving up on us," Nina said, her voice filled with emotion. "I would never give up on us, but I need to grow. I need to take this step for myself, and it's not fair for you to see it as a betrayal." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, visibly conflicted and disturbed. The vulnerability he usually kept hidden was now on display, and Nina could see how much he was struggling to keep his emotions in check. "I know it's an important opportunity, but do you really want to go through with it, even knowing what it could mean for us?" His voice wavered slightly, and for the first time, Nina saw a side of Alex she'd never seen before, a side that was insecure, vulnerable, and fearful of the future. She moved closer, reaching out to hold his hand, and this time, he didn't pull away. She sensed that, despite his fear, there was still room for them to have an honest conversation without barriers. Nina knew he needed to hear that her intention wasn't to end the relationship, but to pursue her own path without letting go of what they had built together. "Alex, I don't want to lose what we have, but I want you to understand that my career is important to me. I've worked so hard to get here, and this offer represents something I've always dreamed of. I want us to face this together without seeing it as abandonment." He listened in silence, taking in every word, and Nina could see him grappling with her explanation. The fear of losing her, mixed with wounded pride, made him feel uneasy, but at the same time, he knew she was being sincere. For a moment, they both stayed silent, simply holding each other's hands, as if they were trying to find a solution without having to sacrifice what they felt. "I just need time to understand this, Nina," Alex finally said in a low voice. "It's not easy for me to accept that you might choose to leave, but I know you need to follow your own path." She nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. She knew he was willing to listen, but that accepting the situation would be a process requiring patience and understanding. After days of silence and introspection, Alex and Nina met again, each carrying intense and conflicted emotions since their last conversation. Nina had realized that the tension between them was unsustainable and that, to move forward, they needed to lay bare all their feelings, fears, pride, and insecurities they'd been repressing. She knew this would be a difficult confrontation, but it was the only way to reach a true and honest resolution. That evening, they met in Alex's office, away from distractions and prying eyes, both entering the room with a mix of anxiety and determination. The silence of the room amplified the weight of what they were about to say, making everything feel more intense. Alex began, taking a deep breath as he tried to maintain control, but the strain in his voice revealed how deeply affected he was. "I can't shake the feeling that you're giving up on us, Nina," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "Ever since that offer came up, it feels like you're ready to leave everything behind, including me." Nina felt a pang in her chest as his words sank in. She knew Alex was expressing a deep fear, but she couldn't ignore how much that hurt her. She had never wanted him to feel abandoned, yet she couldn't deny the sense that he was asking her to choose between him and her dreams. "Alex, I don't want you to feel that way," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not giving up on you. On the contrary, I just wanted you to support my decision, to understand that this opportunity is something I've worked my whole life to achieve." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly uneasy, averting his gaze as he struggled to find the right words. There was an internal battle raging within him, an attempt to balance his fear of losing her and his pride in having such an ambitious and talented woman by his side. "I understand it's a huge opportunity for you, but I'm also scared," he admitted, finally looking at her. "Scared that by choosing this path, you'll realize you don't need me, that you can move forward without looking back." Alex's words took Nina by surprise, and she realized that behind the confident, decisive man he always appeared to be, there was someone vulnerable, someone afraid of being left behind. She hadn't known he felt this way, that he was as insecure as she sometimes felt. She stepped closer, taking his hands firmly in hers, and with a gentle voice, tried to convey everything he meant to her. "Alex, I never wanted you to feel that way. I never wanted you to feel like I'd leave you. But I need you to trust me, to know that being with you isn't a decision I'm making halfway. I love you, and I just want us to find a way to make this work together." He held her hands, and his eyes revealed a deep sadness mixed with relief. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe in her words, to recognize that despite the fears and challenges, Nina was by his side unconditionally. "I love you too, Nina," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I just need to know that, no matter what happens, you'll be by my side, just as I'll be by yours." The intensity of the moment enveloped them, and unable to contain their emotions, they both began to cry. Their tears were an expression of relief, of mutual understanding, and of a silent promise that they would face any obstacle together. That night, Alex's office seemed darker and more laden with tension than ever. They had both tried to avoid this moment, but they knew that what they felt could no longer be silenced by rational choices or quiet fears. Alex and Nina faced each other, surrounded by a silence brimming with repressed emotions, each one carefully measuring the impact of the words they were about to say. Their relationship, which had begun with attraction and professional barriers, had evolved into something much deeper, but now it seemed threatened by the very intensity of their feelings and the divergent paths they were each contemplating. Nina began to speak, her voice low and trembling. There was so much she wanted to say, but she feared that her words wouldn't be enough to convey everything she felt. Still, she gathered her courage and expressed her feelings with a frankness she had never dared before. "Alex, I understand that you're scared. But there's something you need to understand," she said, holding his gaze. "I've always sought independence, always wanted to build something for myself. That doesn't mean I'm choosing a career over us. I just want to feel fulfilled, and She took a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I just want you to be part of it, to be by my side in this journey." Her words carried a mix of love and pain, and Alex felt the weight of what she was saying. Hearing the sincerity in her voice, he began to recognize the depth of his own insecurity. For the first time, he confronted the idea that his fear of abandonment was an old wound, something he had carried for years and projected onto her. He looked away, feeling vulnerable and exposed in a way he had never experienced. I've never been good at trusting Nina," he confessed, his voice heavy. "I always thought that to avoid getting hurt, I had to keep people at a certain distance, to focus on what I could control. And then you came along, and I felt out of control, vulnerable. I think that scared me. Maybe that's the real issue. I don't know how to love without protecting myself, without fearing I'll be left behind." Nina felt a pang in her chest as she heard these words. She finally saw the side of Alex he had always kept hidden, the man who both attracted and frustrated her, but who, deep down, was just someone afraid of losing what mattered most. She looked at him in silence for a moment, letting him see that she understood him, that she didn't judge him, and that she was willing to do whatever it took to overcome this obstacle together. "I'm not going anywhere, Alex," she replied, her voice gentle but resolute. "But I can't be the reason you give up on something you've always wanted. What we have is important, and you're important. But I need you to trust me enough to understand that this isn't a choice between you and my future. They're just two parts of my life that I want to bring together, without having to sacrifice either." He nodded, taking in every word. He felt torn between the desire to hold on to her and the insecurity that consumed him. He wanted to believe her, to believe they could find a balance, but the doubts lingered. He let out a heavy sigh, as if releasing a weight he'd carried for a long time. Maybe I've been selfish in asking you to stay, in fearing that you'd leave me to pursue your dreams, he murmured, looking at their intertwined hands. I guess, deep down, I just don't know how to deal with the possibility that one day, you'll realize you don't need me in your life. His words hung in the air, and Nina felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had never imagined that Alex carried such a fear of abandonment and rejection. He had always seemed so strong, so self-assured, that the revelation of his vulnerability touched her deeply. She released his hands and moved closer, holding his face with tenderness. You are a part of my life, Alex, a part I'm not willing to let go of. But I can't prove that with words alone, only with time and with the trust I hope we can build together. Alex pulled her into his arms, feeling the warmth and security she offered. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to relax, to believe he deserved this, that he didn't have to live defensively. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't try to hide them. Nina held him tightly, showing him that she would be there for him, that there was no more room for fear between them. The silence between them was interrupted only by the sound of their breathing and the weight of the words they had shared. They were both emotionally exhausted, but they felt that something had shifted, something that connected them in a new and deeper way. The annual Cameron Corp event was in full swing. Executives and employees from every department filled the luxurious hall, celebrating another year of achievements. Alex moved through the space, maintaining the professional demeanor he was known for. But he knew this night would be special. Since his last conversation with Nina, something within him had shifted. He realized that by keeping their relationship hidden, he was denying something fundamental for both of them. He wanted everyone to know not just about the relationship, but about what Nina meant to him and how profoundly she had changed his life. Nina arrived a bit later, dressed in an elegant black dress that made her stand out among the attendees. She knew Alex had planned something special for the evening, but she didn't realize the full extent of what he was about to do. When she saw him standing in a corner, their eyes met, and she noticed a difference in him, as though he had finally made a decisive choice. She walked toward him, and he greeted her with a gentle smile, briefly holding her hand before letting go. During the dinner, Alex took the stage for the traditional annual speech. He began by speaking about the year's challenges and achievements, thanking everyone for their dedication and hard work. His voice was steady and clear, commanding the room's attention. But then, he paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and after a brief silence, looked directly at Nina, who was seated in the front row. This company wouldn't be what it is without each of you, he began, his voice softer. But beyond all that we've accomplished, I also want to thank someone who has been a quiet and constant strength in my life. Someone who's shown me a new way to view the world. Murmurs began to ripple through the hall, and people turned to follow Alex's gaze, which was fixed on Nina. She felt her cheeks flush, her heart racing with the intensity of his words. He continued, never looking away from her, as if she were the only one in the room. Nina Park, you're not only an exemplary professional. You're an incredible woman who taught me to let go of old defenses and to see beyond the limits I always set for myself. He paused, the emotion clear in his voice. I want everyone to know how much you mean to me, and I'm tired of hiding it. Tonight, I don't care about the rules or the possible repercussions. I only care about you. A stunned silence fell over the hall, followed by whispers of surprise and glances exchanged from every corner. Alex's revelation was unexpected, especially in such a formal public setting. He stepped down from the stage and walked toward Nina, with every eye following his movements. When he reached her, he extended his hand, and with her heart pounding, she took it without hesitation. In that moment, all the fears and insecurities that had haunted them vanished. Are you ready to face whatever comes by my side? He whispered, smiling, and she nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. The initial shock of Alex's declaration quickly turned into an intense buzz. Colleagues and executives whispered, exchanging glances of surprise and admiration. Some murmured in disapproval, but many were visibly moved by his unexpected gesture of sincerity. Alex knew his actions would cause a stir and could imagine the repercussions within and outside the company. But for the first time in years, he didn't care about others' judgment. All that mattered was how he felt about Nina and his readiness to face any challenge with her. As the event ended, word of Alex's declaration had already begun to spread, and he knew they would soon have to deal with the consequences. Some of the more conservative executives approached him with cautious expressions, hinting that such a public statement could compromise the company's image and even his leadership. However, he listened calmly, replying that he understood their concerns, but that his personal life should not interfere with his professional conduct. "I'm aware of the risks and accept the consequences," Alex stated firmly. "But I don't see why my feelings for someone on my team should be considered a threat as long as we maintain professionalism in the workplace." Nina, by his side, observed his firm and confident stance, feeling stronger and more secure. For so long, she had feared the repercussions of their relationship, the judgment of others, and the obstacles that might arise. But now, with Alex openly by her side, she felt they could overcome any difficulty. He had chosen to stand with her publicly, and that was all she needed to fully trust in what they shared. In the weeks that followed, Alex and Nina's relationship continued to be a hot topic within Cameron Corp. Some colleagues admired their courage, respecting how they had openly faced everyone's scrutiny, while others remained critical, questioning whether their involvement might influence Alex's decisions. For Nina, the changes were intense, but with Alex's support, she felt prepared to face any judgment or challenge. One afternoon, after a board meeting, one of the senior executives discreetly approached her, subtly suggesting she consider the implications of her relationship with Alex on the company's future and her own career. Nina listened respectfully, acknowledging his perspective, but in the end, she replied with conviction, "I understand your concerns, but I assure you my relationship with Alex doesn't interfere with my ability to contribute to Cameron Corp. I work here because I believe in what we're doing, and my commitment to the company won't be compromised." The executive was taken aback by her straightforward response, but her sincerity seemed to convince him. In the following days, Nina and Alex maintained their focus on work, facing each look and comment with calmness. Gradually, the murmurs faded, and colleagues began accepting their relationship as part of the company's routine, respecting the choice they had both made. In every glance they shared, every moment spent together, Alex and Nina knew they had overcome a significant barrier. They had defied expectations, broken down fears, and embraced a love that was worth every risk. The afternoon at the office felt ordinary until Alex was called into an emergency meeting with the board and the investors' council. Entering the room, he immediately sensed a weightier atmosphere, hinting at something serious. The council members, usually warm and welcoming, wore tense, closed expressions. At the center of the table lay a familiar file, the contract with the multinational they had been negotiating for a multi-million-dollar project. A knot formed in Alex's stomach. Meetings like these weren't usually called in haste. As he took his seat, Alex greeted the others, trying to project confidence, though the tension was palpable. One of the directors began explaining that in recent weeks, the client had voiced concerns about Cameron Corp's new image. The partnership required the company to uphold standards of professionalism and focus, but the client, it seemed, interpreted Alex's public relationship with an employee as a factor that could tarnish this image. "They feel our company appears less professional and worry this situation might interfere with their confidence in us," one of the board members explained, keeping his tone neutral. "In short, Alex, they see your personal relationship with a colleague as compromising the impartiality required for a partnership of this magnitude." Hearing this, Alex felt indignation rise within him. He was a consummate professional, and the idea that his relationship with Nina could be viewed as a personal and financial liability angered him deeply. Holding his composure, he assured the council that his relationship with Nina had no impact on Cameron Corp's values or his work. Nevertheless, the board informed him that the client was unyielding and that the contract, once almost a certainty, was now canceled. Leaving the meeting, Alex felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. His thoughts immediately turned to Nina. He knew she'd quickly pick up on the fallout from the canceled contract, and he couldn't stand the thought of her feeling any guilt over something beyond her control. When he saw her in the hallway, her face creased with worry as she took in his shaken expression. He knew he had to tell her the truth. Once they were behind closed doors, Nina waited in silence, her concern palpable. Alex took a deep breath and then told her about the council meeting and the client's decision to cancel the contract because of their relationship. "So, they believe our relationship is a threat to Cameron Corp's image?" Nina asked, incredulous and saddened. "And that was enough for them to cancel a contract we all worked so hard to secure?" Alex nodded, feeling powerless against such unfair scrutiny. He tried to hold it together, but seeing Nina's disheartened expression made his own pain feel even sharper. This wasn't just about the contract. It was an affront to the dedication they had poured into the company. "I'm so sorry, Nina," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion he rarely let surface. "I never wanted you to go through something like this, and it's not fair for our personal life to intrude this way. But I'm ready to face this with you. If we're being judged on something that doesn't affect our professionalism, maybe it's a chance to show everyone we have nothing to hide or fear." Nina listened, taking in each word. She felt a deep sadness, knowing her hard work was being overshadowed by a superficial judgment. But at the same time, she drew strength from Alex's unwavering support. He was ready to face the criticism and consequences alongside her, and that gave her the courage to press forward. "Then, we'll face it together," she replied, taking his hand. "I know it'll be tough, and not everyone will support us, but I'm not going to back down because of this. We've worked hard to get here, and I won't let a contract or other people's opinions erase that." Alex squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of relief and determination. Her strength was everything he needed to face whatever lay ahead. In that moment, he knew more than ever that he was ready to fight for her, for them, and for everything they'd built together, no matter the challenges. In the days following, news of the canceled contract spread quickly through Cameron Corp. Initially, few people knew the real reason, but soon rumors circulated, with some colleagues making subtle remarks and discreet inquiries. Their relationship had become a central topic, and gossip filtered back to Alex and Nina, turning what was once a supportive environment into one rife with quiet judgment. For Nina, the next few days were especially difficult. In meetings, she felt the stares and sensed the discomfort from colleagues who had once openly supported her. Some allowed their opinions to seep through in subtle ways, and in emails and discussions, an undercurrent of scrutiny emerged, as if her every step was being weighed against her relationship with Alex. Meanwhile, Alex faced similar challenges in board meetings and among the company's executives. Though indirect, many expressed dissatisfaction with his decision to maintain the relationship, especially after the high-profile contract loss. To them, his choice broke traditional standards, something they weren't ready to accept. In private, one board member even suggested he reconsider his involvement with Nina for the good of the company's image. In one of these meetings, the oldest council member pulled Alex aside for a personal talk. With a cautious tone, he mentioned Cameron Corp's reputation and how Alex's personal exposure affected the company's public perception. "Alex, I know what's at stake is important to you, but we must think about what's best for Cameron Corp. Our image of professionalism was built over years, and some things need to remain within boundaries," the advisor remarked, trying to be diplomatic while showing clear discomfort. Alex listened, feeling the pressure mounting. His life outside work was clashing with the very place he had helped build. He knew many were waiting for him to resolve the situation, but he was resolute. He wouldn't sacrifice his relationship with Nina just to maintain an image. Returning to his office after the meeting, he found Nina waiting, ready to discuss an upcoming project. Seeing him so dispirited, she immediately sensed something was wrong, and he shared the conversation and the subtle expectations the council had hinted at. Each word felt like adding weight to an already heavy burden, as though their workplace itself had become an invisible barrier. "Alex, I don't know how this will end. Sometimes it feels like we're fighting something so much bigger than us," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly as she held his hand. "I don't want to be the reason your career, your work here, is jeopardized." "Maybe." "No," Alex interrupted, grasping her hand firmly. "I won't give up on you, Nina. Not after everything we've faced. They can demand what they want, but my commitment to you isn't negotiable." Seeing his resolve, Nina felt her heart lift with renewed strength. She knew the path would be challenging, but Alex's readiness to stand by her was all the encouragement she needed to stay strong. Together, they decided to face the challenges head-on, proving that their relationship didn't compromise their dedication or capabilities. The following morning, Alex called a meeting with the board and senior executives. It was time to confront the insinuations and questions directly, making it clear he would remain committed to Cameron Corp and equally to his relationship with Nina. In the meeting, Alex was direct. He shared how deeply he valued his relationship with Nina and committed to maintaining a professional approach in the workplace. But he firmly added that he would not allow their relationship to be used as a pretext to undermine his commitment to the company or jeopardize his future. His stance was unwavering, and though some resistance lingered, he insisted that their performance spoke for itself. "If there are challenges we need to address for the good of the company, I'm open to it. But I want to make it clear that Nina and I are committed professionals, and I won't accept our relationship being treated as a threat to what we've built here. She is an exceptional professional, and our personal bond has no bearing on our dedication to this place." Alex's words reverberated across the room, and though some council members remained skeptical, others appeared touched by his sincerity. The advisor who had previously counseled him looked at Alex with a grudging respect, as if he finally understood just how much Alex was willing to fight for what mattered to him. When the meeting concluded, Alex found Nina waiting anxiously outside. Seeing him, she knew he had taken a stand, and a relieved smile crossed her face. Unconcerned with the stares around them, she stepped forward and took his hand, knowing they were more united and determined than ever. That week became a turning point for them both. Although some colleagues remained uneasy about their relationship, the focus gradually returned to their work. Alex and Nina poured themselves into their roles, demonstrating the excellence that had always set them apart. Their mutual trust and dedication to the company were indisputable, and over time, even hesitant colleagues and executives began to respect their choice. They knew full acceptance might never come, but they were ready to face whatever lay ahead, showing that love and professionalism could, indeed, coexist. By month's end, the company's performance reports spoke louder than any rumors or judgments. After months of tension and challenges at Cameron Corp, the idea of a fresh start glimmered like a light at the end of the tunnel for Alex and Nina. Their experience at the company had left deep marks on both, but it had also reinforced their connection, showing how much they shared a common vision for the corporate world and the value of passionate, ethical work. Starting their own business became a clearer and more achievable goal, with excitement over creating something together gradually replacing the weight of recent obstacles. That evening, sitting on the balcony of Alex's apartment with the city lights sprawled beneath them and a gentle breeze surrounding them, they had their first concrete conversation about building a company of their own. With glasses of wine in hand, Alex sketched an initial structure, and Nina began envisioning the types of projects and clients they might attract, the values they wanted to promote, and the innovative directions they hoped to pursue. Speaking about the future allowed them to shed the accumulated tensions and embrace the dream of something new. something where they could pour in their experience and passion without outside interference. For Alex, this decision wasn't just a practical solution, but also a symbol of freedom and authenticity. After years of commitments to Cameron Corp and restrictions imposed by his position and investor expectations, he felt ready for something more meaningful, an opportunity to pursue his vision independently. To him, founding a company with Nina wasn't just a professional choice. It was a way to show her and himself that they were ready to face the world together, that the love and partnership they had built was unwavering. Nina, on the other hand, felt energized by the prospect of freeing herself from the judgments and pressures she had experienced at Cameron Corp. The emotional strain of recent months made her realize she wanted to work in a place where she could be herself without hiding parts of who she was. The possibility of creating an environment where professional and personal life could coexist harmoniously allowed her to see a future brimming with possibilities. And alongside Alex, she knew they could build something truly meaningful and inspiring. In the days that followed, Alex and Nina started meeting regularly to discuss the structure and objectives of their company. At a quiet cafe in the city, with papers and notes spread among the coffee cups, they began shaping the vision that would define their business. They decided the company would focus on interior design and strategic consulting, combining Nina's expertise in creating inspiring spaces with Alex's experience in corporate planning and management. It was a perfect fusion of talents, and the excitement in every planning session reaffirmed their choice to embark on this path together. During one of these meetings, Nina shared her ideas about the company's mission, her belief that design could transform not only spaces, but also people's emotions and productivity. Alex listened intently, captivated by her passion as she spoke about the impact physical environments have on individuals. He suggested that, in addition to interior design, they could expand into organizational consulting, offering a holistic approach to help clients align their culture, workspace, and business vision. "Imagine the impact we could have, Nina," he said, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We're not just creating beautiful spaces. We're creating environments that inspire, that bring out the best in people, that transform the way they relate to work and each other." The idea of a comprehensive approach thrilled Nina. She felt this wouldn't just be a financial endeavor, but an opportunity to bring something innovative and meaningful to the market. With each meeting and discussion, their project became more tangible, and the synergy between them flowed naturally. They began brainstorming names, designing logos, and conducting detailed market research. Both knew the journey ahead would have its risks and challenges, but the freedom and autonomy they sought were something neither was willing to give up. As they laid the company's foundations, Alex and Nina encountered doubt and hesitation from colleagues and close friends. Some questioned the decision, arguing that leaving an established company to start from scratch in a competitive market was risky. Others hinted that the decision might be impulsive, that their passion for each other might be clouding their judgment. But Alex and Nina listened calmly, confident in their choice. They knew this decision wasn't merely a response to recent difficulties. It was an affirmation of their values, a choice for their lives. Over the following months, they set up the financial foundations of their new venture, seeking investors and exploring ways to attract clients. They reached out to contacts they had built throughout their careers, setting up meetings and presentations with potential investors who shared their vision. The initial conversations were promising, and gradually, they felt they were building something solid. Each new step brought them closer to the dream they had nurtured together, a dream that reflected the best of both of them. The decision to create their own business also unearthed a new side to their relationship. Working together on something so personal and meaningful revealed deeper layers of their personalities, and they discovered just how well they complemented each other, both at work and in life. There were moments of tension, heated discussions over project details, but in the end, they always found understanding, strengthened by mutual respect and trust. It was as if every challenge they faced together only solidified the bond they had built, proving that, Side by side, they could overcome any difficulty. Their first major success came when they secured a contract with a significant client, a growing startup that was captivated by their innovative approach and the passion they brought to the project. The client wanted a space that reflected the youthful, creative spirit of the company, and Nina dedicated herself to designing a functional and inspiring environment that would foster collaboration and productivity. Meanwhile, Alex handled the project's strategic aspects, planning the execution and aligning organizational goals with the client's growth vision. At the space's grand opening, Alex and Nina felt overwhelmed with emotion as they saw the fruits of months of hard work. The atmosphere was warm and energizing, a perfect embodiment of the vision they wanted to bring to the market. The clients were visibly impressed and appreciative, and at the end of the opening event, they called Alex and Nina over to personally congratulate them, expressing how their work had exceeded expectations. "You really captured our essence. This place is more than we could have hoped for," the startup's founder said, shaking Alex's hand and smiling warmly at Nina. After the inauguration, as they walked home, Alex held Nina's hand, and they shared a look of mutual pride and fulfillment. They knew this was only the beginning, but the project's success reinforced their belief that they were on the right path. With each challenge they faced together, their connection grew stronger, and the love they shared transcended obstacles, transforming into an unbreakable partnership. "I never imagined that building a company together could bring us this close," Alex confessed, looking at her with tenderness. "I feel like we're creating something that's truly ours, something that reflects the best of both of us." Nina smiled, feeling a profound connection to him. Creating the company had brought them relief and renewed hope, but most of all, it had shown them that together, they were capable of extraordinary things. Since launching their new company, Alex and Nina had experienced a period of success and personal fulfillment, but they remained alert to potential challenges. Their experience had taught them that the corporate world was unpredictable, and while they were thrilled by the growth of their projects and new clients, they knew that competition and old rivalries could still pose complications. In this context, Victoria, Alex's ex-girlfriend and an executive at Cameron Corp, reappeared. She had always resented Alex's relationship with Nina, and when she learned that their company was growing quickly and landing significant contracts, some of which Cameron Corp had been negotiating, she saw an opportunity for revenge while defending her own company's interests. The first sign of trouble emerged when Alex and Nina noticed a series of unexpected emails from potential clients referencing confidential information that had never been publicly disclosed. These were details about projects and proposals that only their internal team could know. For Alex, it was clear that something serious was happening. Nina, meanwhile, tried to understand how such information could have leaked, as both had always been meticulous about data privacy and contract strategies. The situation quickly worsened when one of their key clients, who had already signed a contract and was excited to begin a new project, sent an email saying they had received a more competitive offer and were reconsidering their agreement. When Alex and Nina reached out to understand the situation, the client's response was cold and evasive, as if they had already decided to sever the partnership. Seeing a pattern, Alex decided to investigate further. He and Nina spent hours reviewing all contracts, shared documents, and even system access logs, trying to identify the source of the leak. It wasn't long before they noticed a troubling pattern. Clients who were backing out of contracts or referencing other offers were, coincidentally, in talks with Cameron Corp. The discovery made Alex recall a meeting from months earlier when Victoria had made pointed comments about him and Nina, subtly questioning their reputation at Cameron Corp. He remembered her resentful tone upon learning of his relationship with Nina and his decision to start something new. A chill ran down his spine as he realized Victoria might be behind the recent sabotage, using her influence and access to information to undermine their company's growth. When Alex shared his suspicions with Nina, she was in shock. Though she knew about the history between Alex and Victoria, She never imagined that Victoria would resort to such underhanded tactics. After the initial surprise, they agreed that the only way to fight back was to confront Victoria directly while simultaneously gathering concrete evidence. They knew that accusing her without solid proof could ruin their credibility and make things even worse. In the days that followed, Alex contacted trusted lawyers and cybersecurity experts to help investigate possible data leaks and uncover any links between Cameron Corp and their lost contracts. The investigation was exhausting, and Alex and Nina remained focused, reviewing every email, document, and client communication to find evidence connecting Victoria to the disruptions. One particularly tense afternoon, one of their digital security experts found something: a series of anonymous emails sent from an address that, when traced, originated from a device within Cameron Corp. While the emails were cloaked in anonymity, the metadata revealed they had been sent from a network associated with Victoria's office. It was the proof they needed. With evidence in hand, Alex and Nina organized an emergency meeting with their lawyers and a few independent executives to assess their next steps. They knew that filing a lawsuit for defamation and contract interference would be complex and financially taxing, but they agreed it was necessary. This was not only about defending their company, but also about protecting the integrity of the work they had built together. A few days later, when Victoria received notice of the lawsuit, she confronted Alex, accusing him of betrayal and claiming he was destroying their shared history by turning against someone from his past. But Alex, keeping his composure, responded calmly and firmly, making it clear that she was the one who had betrayed trust and ethics. Victoria's face showed shock and indignation, but Alex was unyielding. He knew that to protect his future with Nina, he had to leave his past with Victoria behind. The legal battle was draining, and the conflict quickly attracted corporate media attention, which latched onto the story of Alex and Nina's new company going up against Cameron Corp, headed by Victoria. Throughout these months, they faced pressure from all sides: journalists seeking statements, former colleagues offering support, and in some cases, criticizing their decision to take the matter public. The tension was constant, but the support they found in each other kept them resilient. Nina, who initially felt the weight of the ordeal, found strength she didn't know she had with Alex by her side. Together, they resolved not to let anything shake the foundation they had built. The case finally went to court, and after several hearings and testimonies, the evidence against Victoria was deemed substantial. The verdict ruled in favor of Alex and Nina, and Victoria was ordered to pay damages and to cease any attempts to interfere with their business. This legal victory brought immense relief, but more than that, it proved that they were prepared to face any challenge together. The experience, though exhausting, strengthened their trust and partnership. With the court's decision, Alex and Nina's company began to recover. Many of the clients they had lost returned, impressed by the courage and integrity with which they had handled the situation. New opportunities arose, and their reputation as ethical, committed leaders only grew. The company, once an uncertain dream, was now a solid enterprise built on determination and the courage to stand up against even the toughest adversaries. On a quiet night after the lawsuit ended, Alex and Nina celebrated with a small gathering of friends and business partners who admired their resilience. As they toasted, Alex held Nina's hand, looking at her with a mix of pride and tenderness, feeling that they had finally overcome the last major obstacle their past had thrown at them. He knew that the journey had been difficult, but with Nina by his side, every challenge had been worth it. Later, as they shared a private moment, Alex pulled her close and whispered, "After everything we've been through, there's nothing I wouldn't face with you by my side." Nina smiled, touched, and returned his embrace, knowing that by overcoming adversity together, they had reached a new level of connection and complicity. That morning, sunlight flooded Alex and Nina's office, casting a renewed energy over the space. Together, they were going over the final details of an important new project they had just secured. With the company now stable and backed by a solid base of satisfied clients, every success felt more rewarding than ever. Each achievement was a testament not only to hard work, but to the unbreakable partnership they had forged, one that had triumphed over rivalries, challenges, and external pressures. Sitting together in the office as the workday ended, Alex and Nina looked out over the city through the wide glass windows. The view of the skyline symbolized the future they were building together, free of obstacles and limitations. Alex pulled Nina close, holding her by the waist and gazing into her eyes with a look of pride, admiration, and love. These were the same windows by which they had once exchanged uncertain glances and words of challenge. Now they were the backdrop to a promising, shared future. "Do you remember when all of this was just an idea?" he murmured, holding her hand tenderly. "It feels like just yesterday we were debating contracts, deadlines, and of course, who was more right. Now, after everything, it's the two of us making all the decisions together." Nina laughed, recalling the fiery discussions that had first brought them together and which, in a way, were the beginning of the connection they now shared. She sighed, smiling up at him with a calm contentment. "I never imagined that our initial rivalry would turn into something so beautiful and so uniquely ours. Every tense moment and challenge we faced only showed me how much stronger we are together." Alex embraced her, and for a moment, they stood in silence, absorbing the significance of this moment. They had come a long way, starting with professional rivalry, conflicts, and resistance. Amid it all, they had found a true partnership, a bond that remained unshaken, even during the hardest times. The love they now shared was built on courage, respect, and a deep understanding of each other. And above all, they knew that together, they could accomplish anything. In the following days, they decided it was time to celebrate their union with those they held dear. They organized a small reception for friends and family, a cozy, intimate event to share the joy and success they had achieved. The gathering took place in a blooming garden at one of the properties they had designed together for a client, a special setting that perfectly represented the union of Nina's talent and Alex's business vision. When the day of the reception arrived, the venue looked stunning. Soft lights hung from the trees, casting a gentle glow over the faces of guests who laughed and shared stories with the couple. The event was filled with emotional moments, heartfelt speeches, and warm gazes that reinforced the love everyone could see between Alex and Nina. Close friends reminisced about the early days of their relationship, recalling how they had transformed from competitive colleagues into lifelong partners. At the toast, Alex raised his glass, his eyes sparkling with emotion, and delivered a speech that moved everyone. "Today, we celebrate more than a company or a successful project. We celebrate the courage to walk this path together, facing everything and everyone to find something that is truly ours. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Nina." He looked at her, his voice filled with love and gratitude. "You've shown me that love and work together can take us to unimaginable places. Thank you for being by my side through every moment, good or difficult." Visibly moved, Nina took his hand and replied, her voice choked with emotion, "And I could never have imagined a better partner. Every challenge we faced only showed me how strong and generous you are. Thank you, Alex, for believing in me, in us, and for being the best companion I could ask for." The toast was followed by applause and embraces, and the couple was surrounded by the warmth and support of the friends and family who bore witness to their union. The celebration continued in a joyous, relaxed atmosphere, with conversations and laughter that lasted well into the night. It was a perfect moment of celebration and relief, where everyone could sense that Alex and Nina were ready for whatever the future held. As the night wound down and the last guests left, Alex and Nina remained alone under the twinkling lights and the starry sky above. With his arms around her, Alex kissed her passionately, a gesture that reflected the depth of his love and admiration. For him, this kiss symbolized everything they had overcome and everything they were ready to conquer together. Nina returned the kiss, her heart overflowing with happiness and fulfillment. In that moment, There were no more doubts, hesitations, or fears. The path they had traveled, with all its ups and downs, had finally led them to the place they were always meant to be, side by side, ready for a future without limits. As they stood there under the gentle lights and the glow of the stars, Alex whispered, "Now I can truly say I'm where I've always wanted to be. And I know that, with you by my side, any challenge will be worth it." With another passionate kiss, they sealed not only the night, but also a promise for life. When the kiss finally ended, they sat down together on a nearby bench, their hands still intertwined, communicating a connection that went beyond words. The garden around them was quiet, lit only by the soft lights above and the stars, and both felt part of an eternal moment, as though time itself had stopped, so they could fully absorb the happiness they now shared. It was the end of a long journey, and at the same time, the beginning of a new chapter, one without secrets, doubts, or barriers. Then, Alex looked up at the sky, and after a brief silence, turned to her, his eyes shining with serene intensity. "You know, Nina, when I think of everything we've been through," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion, "I realized that every obstacle was worth it. And the reason for that is that you were by my side through it all. I can't imagine my life without you." She smiled, her own eyes glistening, and held his face lovingly, letting him feel the sincerity in each word that followed. "Alex, you are my rock, my inspiration, my peace. Every challenge and difficult moment only strengthened what I feel for you. Knowing we're on this journey together means I can face anything. I love you more than words can express, and I know our story is only beginning." They sat there, side by side, sharing a profound peace. As they looked up at the starry sky, they made quiet plans for the future, promises that didn't need to be spoken aloud, because they both knew they would be kept. They had proven themselves, not just to each other, but to the world. And now all that was left was the present, the here and now, filled with unshakable love and trust. In that moment, Alex looked at Nina and said in a decisive yet tender tone, "What do you think about making this a ritual? Celebrating every year, no matter the highs or lows, the love that brought us here. I want us to know year after year that we are exactly where we're meant to be." She nodded, touched, and without hesitation, they sealed this promise with another kiss, a kiss that held the certainty that there was nothing left to fear. Their story, which had begun with fierce rivalry, was now a celebration of love, partnership, and the victory they had found in each other. And so, as the lights dimmed around them and the garden wrapped them in a comforting silence, Alex and Nina closed this chapter, ready to begin a new phase of life together, a phase where they knew that nothing was impossible as long as they were by each other's side.